For instance, I do like the hook. Excuse me. Oh my God.
What do you have for dinner?
Hamburgers.
Co-
Um,
Cocaine and hamburgers.
Cocaine and hamburgers.
Hey everyone, my name is Jake, and welcome to this 28th episode of Good Timin. As always on this podcast, we're going to be talking all about one of our favorite bands, the Beach Boys. And I think today's show is going to be a really interesting one because we're going to be covering the band's early years when they were just starting out as a group and beginning to record music together. We're also going to be discussing some of the individual songs and demos that the band recorded during this early period, as well as some of Brian's early collaborations with his close friend Gary Usher. Also, as I'm sure those of you watching the video version of this podcast can see, we also have a very special guest joining us today, author and Beach Boys historian Jim Murphy. Jim is the author of the 2015 book, Becoming the Beach Boys, which covers the band's early years from 1961 to 1963 in great detail. I have yet to get my hands on a copy of Jim's book, but from what my co-host Riley tells me, it's an excellent read and one that he'd recommend to any big Beach Boys fan like ourselves. So I'm definitely looking forward to checking it out when I get a chance, and I would encourage all of our listeners to do the same. So, Jim, we're really excited to have you join us today, and we're looking forward to you enlightening us with all of your Beach Boys knowledge. So, before we get into our discussion, I thought I'd ask you, Jim, if there's anything else you wanted to share about yourself or about your book.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thanks, Riley and Matt and Jake and Nate for inviting me. You guys have got a great podcast. It really thrills me that, guys your age are finding so much joy and pleasure in the music of the Beach Boys, that I loved when I was your age and back in college kind of thing. But I've been a fan since I was 10 years old, when my brother first heard Good Vibrations and he rushed home from a pickup basketball game in the Bronx and said, I don't know what I heard on the radio, but we've got to go out and we've got to find that record. And we went on a quest and we found the Good Vibrations single. We came at home and we played it to death until it almost combusted on the turntable. And we were lifetime Beach Boy fans and bought every album up to that point. That was October of '66. So they had a good number of albums out already, so we caught up on those. And then we were buying Wild Honey and Smiley Smile as they came out, and every album after that, as they came out. So it's really cool to be invited to a podcast like this with young guys that are, so enthused about the music of the Beach Boys. So I really appreciate the invitation.
Of
Um,
course.
the book was a labor of love, the proverbial labor of love. It took me 9 years to write it. It took me another year to find a publisher. I just wanted to write the book that I myself would want to read. I've read everything about the Beach Boys, every article from the UK to the US to Europe, every documentary, everything I could find my hands on. And I always had questions about the early days, I give tons of credits to anyone who writes a book. It's extremely difficult, and every book kind of builds on another one. I use all the other books that came out before mine. Someday someone will write a book that will use mine as a stepping stone. So every author builds upon the authors that, precede them. But I always had questions. Whenever I read every Beach Boy book you can name, and I always came away thinking, well, gee, I still have questions about the early days, and it's not been that long ago. I can, certainly do some research and figure this out. It was kind of like a detective story almost. And to the credit of the other authors, they had like 40 years to talk about, or 50 years. They had these career spanning books. So the early days, the so-called Hite and Morgan era, they had to cover that pretty fast to get on to, sort of the meat of the story. Pet Sound, Smile, you guys know the whole catalog. So I thought, well, let me just take that early slice. And I was going to end the book in 62, actually. Then I pushed it back to 63. I thought, let me just take those early years and really kind of concentrate on that, because I love those origin stories, how Bruce Wayne becomes Batman and that all that kind of stuff. So I thought, how did they become the Beach Boys? How did this actually happen? This band that we love so much that's been going on 60 years now. So yeah, just started. I thought it would be an article at first for like one of the record collecting magazines, Discoveries or Goldmine. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with them or not, but they were the big record collecting magazines in the day, and helped me make my own collection actually. And I just thought I'd write a 5-page article, 6-page article. Anyway, it grew and it grew and it grew. Every person I talked to gave me 4 more names. So I wound up, talking to everybody I could track down and find. And then it became this, almost unmanageable manuscript of like 180,000 words at one point. I whittled it down to 120,000 words. It took me like a year to find a publisher, a lot of rejections. So you have to have thick skin when you're a first-time author. And then I finally got McFarlane. I always mispronounce that. McFarlane Publications and Books to publish it, and they did a nice job. A lot of cool photos, and it was really always with the fans in mind because I thought, okay, I have to put in the picture sleeve of Surfing Safari backed with 409, but every Beach Boy fan has seen that picture sleeve a million times. But I got to put it in there because it's a key part of the history, the first Capitol single. But I wanted to put photos in there that no one had seen before. No one had seen Hite Morgan. No one had seen a photo of Dorinda Morgan. No one had seen a photo of Judy Bowles. Very few photos maybe of even Nick Finney had surfaced, or Herb Newman of Era Record Sales, Bill Angel, the record librarian at KFWB, who really helped, get the song played. Yeah, anyway, so I tried to find all these cool photos that fans would dig, and they would be like, oh, that's what Hype Morgan looked like. That's what Judy Bowles looked like. Brian was engaged to Judy Bowles for like 2 years and 3 months, I think it was. It was a really key part of his early romantic life and early creative life. And no one had ever interviewed Judy Bowles. It was just astounding. I mean, you'd read all these things and everything was just sort of supposition or, in some cases just made up. And when I talked to Judy, she was like, I read every single book about the Beach Boys, and I turn to the I turn to the index rather, and I look up my name and I see where I am in that book. And they always say they have blonde hair and blue eyes. And she said, that's not true. I've got brown eyes, and I'm proud of my brown eyes. And she said, and no one took the time to talk to me. So I said, well, Judy, I found that kind of astounding, but I was really, really happy that she agreed to talk to me. And that took 2 years, 2 years to find her and 2 years to convince her to talk to me. That I wasn't some crazy, guy or whatever, or, looking for salacious details or whatever. But she was just wonderful to talk to, friendly, down to earth, funny, still filled with love for Brian Wilson, and very okay with how their lives diverged and how his life went one way and her life went, more common, a more common life, basically, like most of us. But a wonderful person. And, was so happy to be able to tell her story truthfully, who she was, where she came from, how they met, personal anecdotes of their dates and what she thought of him. And so it was really neat to kind of provide that little glimpse of the story. But anyway, going back, you talk about the Wilson brothers, cousin Mike Love, and high school chum Al Jardine. So how do they become the Beach Boys? How does this all happen? How did they merge together? You start off with the Wilson brothers, right? Brian born in 1942, Dennis comes along in 44, Carl comes along in December of 46. Basically, every 2 years, they have a son. So the boys are very close in age. Murray and Audrey, their parents, very musical family. Audrey plays piano. Murray tinkers and plays piano and organ. He's a songwriter. He was probably writing songs in the early 50s, maybe the late 40s into the early 50s, when the boys were very, very young. So the house was always filled with music. And of course, the music of Murray's generation was not the music of Brian's generation, but that influenced them a lot. Les Paul and Mary Ford and Guy Mitchell, Rosemary Clooney, all these kind of music that Brian constantly heard. The great story of, Brian's not even a year old when he hears Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. And there's a picture of it in the new book, The Beach Boys by the Beach Boys, book by Genesis Publications. And he's moved by it and he wants to hear it over and over again. I'm not sure if he's even verbal yet. And he's probably signaling to his mother, like, play it again. He just wants to hear it over and over again. And that came out in March of 43. And Brian is born in June of 42. So he's like, maybe 9 months old at that point, 8 or 9 months old. It's just astounding that this young baby is so moved by Rhapsody in Blue. And of course, as he gets older, and then the story of how, she gave him music lessons, but the music teacher said, you know what, I think you're wasting your money because he listens to it by ear and he plays it. And there's really not much that I can teach him. So, Brian grows up as this musical prodigy, although the word wasn't used at the time. I don't think anyone fully realized his gift until much later on. And then the other two brothers come along, and it's a musical household. But Brian has sort of a pivotal moment 1 week before he turns 13. June 13th, 1955, about exactly 1 week before his 13th birthday. He hears Day by Day by the Four Freshmen on a car radio, and he's driving with his mother, Audrey, somewhere in the Hawthorne, Southern California area. And he just loves it. He just loves the song. And she brings him to LaShawn's record store where they have these listening booths, and you can go in there and you can take an album and play it and decide if you want to buy it or not. And she buys him this Four Freshmen album, and that begins his true education. He's in school, he's in intermediate school, and then he goes to Hawthorne High School in 1956, the following year. But that's his musical education from 1955 straight on to like 61, 62 when the Beach Boys form. He has basically a 5 to 6 year intensive musical training course. He gets all these Four Freshmen albums. He loves that first wave of rock and roll too. People forget that, he's growing up in this era with the first wave of rock and roll. Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, Buddy Holly, of course, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis. I mentioned Little Richard again. So all that music is just coming, is just bombarding him kind of thing. But he also loves, the beautiful, pretty music of Rosemary Clooney, Guy Mitchell, the Hi-Lows, the Four Freshmen, Bob Flanagan's high voice with the Four Freshmen. So he's taking all these musical influences and they're just, distilling them down and coming out of him in different ways. And he'd come home from school, he'd get a big glass of orange juice, he'd sit down at his phonograph player and his upright piano, and he'd drop the needle on one song and he'd figure out a couple of bars of that song and then put the needle back on the vinyl. And he'd do that over and over and over again until he figured out the song. And to be able to do that at, mid to late teens kind of thing is a true gift, to be able to listen to a song and know exactly what's going on, especially in the complicated jazz chords that the Four Freshmen were using, actually. So that becomes his musical education. And the formation of the Beach Boys is really all these sort of disparate forces sort of coming together. Because at the same time, his cousin Mike Love is going to Susan Miller Dorsey High School, which is a large African American population. He runs track and he plays basketball. And Mike Love was a really good athlete, really good athlete. I got all the newsletters from his high school and his yearbooks, and he's mentioned, the number of baskets that he scored, the how good of a track star he was. He was a very good athlete, Mike Love. And he's in this largely African American school, and a lot of the music is rhythm and blues. And Mike is just absorbing rhythm and blues and that quick pace of Chuck Berry and the storytelling ability of Chuck Berry. Meanwhile, in Ohio, through upstate New York, through San Francisco, through LA, comes Al Jardine. And Jardine's sensibilities are more, the Weavers, and then of course the Kingston Trio. And he just loves folk music. He just, and in Hawthorne High School in September 1956, Brian enrolls as a freshman. So does Al Jardine, and they don't know each other. And Jardine has got this little group called the Tikis, and then they find out that there's another group called the Tikis that actually have a record label. So yeah, I guess we ought to change our name. So we change it to the Islanders, and it's just a trio, and they're getting together and they're doing some covers. They're doing the Wreck of the John B, which 4 years later, or no, more than 4 years later, 10 years later, from 56 to 66, the Wreck of the John B would become, Sloop John B. And they're getting together at Gary Winfrey's apartment, and they have a Wallensack tape, reel-to-reel tape deck, and they're recording themselves as the Islanders. And it was Al Jardine, Gary Winfrey, who was 1 year ahead of him at Hawthorne High School, and a fellow by the name of Bob Barrow, who is now an attorney. And he was also a classmate of Brian Wilson's and Al Jardine's. So that's the Islanders, formerly the Tikis. And they record, I think maybe 10 or 12 songs on this Wallensack. Some are complete, some are just snippets. I had the privilege of hearing them, actually. And Jardine, even at a young age, was really, really good. Simple chords on the guitar, nothing too complicated or too challenging on the guitar. But good vocals, nice strong voice. You can see the talent already kind of rising up in him, but a real strong folk sensibility. He's not the electric guitar rock and roll guy kind of thing. Dennis likes pretty music. He likes, weepy ballads and songs that make you cry and, love songs and things like that, which is kind of funny because it doesn't go with his gruff exterior, the chiseled good looks and the rough guy kind of image that he has. But when you see the kind of music that Dennis writes later on, I mean, all these big bombastic ballads and love songs, and he's got this big tender heart, and that was there right from the early days. So basically, Al's got his thing going on throughout the high school years. Brian, he just loves music and singing. He puts together all these different ad hoc combos that the members are real fluid in high school. One member may drop out, another member comes in, and Brian teaches them all their harmony parts, and they play for high school assemblies. They've got, the talent show. They've got the charter assembly where all the clubs come together and sort of recruit new members. They've got the student election councils, and Brian's always a part of it. He's always up on stage singing. And one day, Jardine is in the audience, and Brian brings in his cousin. I'm sorry, his cousin Maureen, which is Mike's sister, who played beautiful harp, and he brings in his younger brother Carl. And Jardine is sitting in the audience, and he thinks, "Wow, this guy's pretty good. He's got a real talent for vocal harmony arrangement, and Carl sings nice." And he starts thinking, wow, there's another guy in my class who also has this, musical aspiration kind of thing. So, and they know each other from the high school team, from the high school football team, I should say. They were both on the they were not like really starters. One of the misnomers that you hear about Brian Wilson, that he was the quarterback on the Hawthorne High Cougars. Well, he was really third string. Brian got very, very little play time. And one of the things that I researched was the Cougar newsletter would come out every week in Hawthorne High School. Like I tracked down a copy of that newsletter. It was like a pretty good sized publication, maybe 8 to 12 pages, and it would come out every week. And it would have all the news in the school, all the athletic news, the football team, the track team, basketball, everything. I'll say assemblies, everything. So it was a gold mine for a writer like me. And I got them all from 56 to like 63, covered all the Beach Boy years, even Carl and Dennis. So, he was a third string quarterback. Al was a running back. He was small for a running back, but he was a running back. But again, he did not get a lot of play time, actually. They were not the starters, but they were on the football team, and that's, and they met that way. But they were never really, they kind of moved in different social circles all through high school. So June 16th, 1960, they both graduate Hawthorne High School. And it's a pivotal year, 1960, because Brian is going to stay local in Southern California, and he's going to go to a 2-year community college called El Camino Community College. Jardine's parents have decided to move to Big Rapids, Michigan. And he's going to go to Ferris Institute. It's now called Ferris University, but at the time it was Ferris Institute. His father has accepted a job teaching reprographics, what we were known as photocopy machines, but it was called reprographics at that time. And he's going to be an instructor there at the university. So the father goes ahead. Al graduates. The mother, Virginia, goes ahead to join the father in Michigan, and then Al hitchhikes, I think, to join them out there. And he does his first year at Ferris Institute, and that goes basically from September of 1960 to June of 61. And then there's another pivotal moment there. So, Al is out of the picture for that whole year. Brian is a freshman at easy for me to say, El Camino Community College, studying either music or history and possibly psychology. Brian has said very, very often that he wanted to be a psychologist at one point in his, early life when he was 18 or 19. So he's taken all these different, freshman year college courses. You guys know how it is. You take a whole smattering of courses. You're not really sure what you want to be. And so he's doing that. He's a fairly good student. Was able to get a good contact with the registrar's office, actually, which was invaluable in terms of the research. And he completes his first year. So, we're talking now June of 61. And fortunately for the Beach Boys, Donald Jardine, Al's father, was unhappy with teaching. He felt that the students did not appreciate the wisdom that he was trying to convey to them, that they were not attentive as he would have liked them to have been. He was also kind of a wandering kind of soul kind of thing, always restless, perhaps never fully happy where he was. So he decides to go back to California and work at Royal Blueprint Company, because he was good at reading blueprints for buildings and things like that. And they go back. They go back to Torrance, California, which is not far from Hawthorne. And Al is living with Gary Winfrey that summer, and we're talking again the summer of '61. And he enrolls for his second year of college. His first year, though, at El Camino. Brian enrolls for his second year at El Camino, but they don't meet that summer. Maybe they meet, I think, at the Foster Freeze or one of the hamburger stands along the slick the street there where they would all kind of cruise up and down. And he runs into him and he says, hey, Brian, they know each other from Hawthorne High School. They know each other from the football team. If you ever want to get together and sing some music, that'd be great. But it was just sort of a throwaway line. There was no plans, there was no commitment, there was no follow-up at all. And it doesn't, nothing ever really comes of that. But Gary Winfrey and Bob Barrow and Jardine had written a song called The Wreck of the Hesperus, and it was based on the Longfellow poem of the same title that they had studied in third year English literature class at Hawthorne High School. And they put it to music. It's a real long poem. They didn't use all the stanzas. They just used maybe 4 or 5 of them. And it's a bit of a dirge. It just kind of plods along, kind of thing. But it's a sea tale kind of thing in the Herman Melville vein almost. And they are excited about this. And Al remembers that Brian had this musical background, and he had heard through the grapevine that Brian's father had some musical connections. So Al and Gary thought, well, maybe Brian knows something that we can do. Maybe we can have this recorded professionally. Maybe somebody can give us some advice. And if we recorded it on something other than a reel-to-reel wall and sock, maybe it will sound better, in a professional studio. So they go over one day to Brian's house, and Brian's not home. He's at baseball practice. He's coaching. And Murray's not home, and Audrey's home, and she invites them in. And Audrey says, she's very encouraging, very loving, and is talking to Al and Gary about Murray Wilson's music and all his sheet music that he has published. And the name of his publisher is Hite Morgan. And Murray by that point has had a decade-long relationship with Hite Morgan. He's had not all of his songs, but a lot of his songs published through Hite and Dorinda Morgan's Guild Music Publishing Company. And so Hite is his music publisher. And through Hite, he has had a couple of his songs recorded by local artists. Nothing real big, but committed to vinyl. And some of them are actually quite collectible now, which is kind of ironic. And you pay big bucks for them. So he's kind of on the fringe, Murray, that is, he's on the fringe, as is Hite, on the fringe of the music industry in Los Angeles. But he's something more than Jardine has, So Audrey says, well, here's Hite's number. Why don't you call him? And they do that. And they call him, and they go down to Stereo Masters, which is a facility that Hite Morgan owned. Actually, he had a recording facility at 2511 Mayberry Street in his home, which is still there. Actually, the studio's gone, but the home is still there in the Silver Lake area of Los Angeles. And then he had this recording studio called Stereo Masters on Melrose. And kind of a cool thing, it's now called Angel Studio. Oh, no, that's I'm mixing up studios here. I'll get to that one later. Anyway, the one on Melrose was called Stereo Masters. So they go down to Melrose. This is Gary Winfrey and Al Jardine with their little Wallensack reel-to-reel tape of The Wreck of the Hesperus. And they played for Hite and Dorinda, and Hite and Dorinda are like, yeah, pleasant, it's nice, but it's not going to set the world on fire. We need something, exciting. We need something in the vein of Chuck Berry. We need something, because they're pretty well schooled, the Morgans, as to what's going to be a hit and what's not going to be a hit. And their whole thing was, if they found a hit record that they thought could go up the charts, their big thing was, can we have the B-side? In other words, an A-side can't hit #1 without dragging along the B-side. So if I can get my song as songwriter and music publisher on the B-side of a hit record, even if it's top 20, top 50, top 40, whatever, that's a good deal for me. So they were always on the outlook for talent, but they always wanted that B-side, the coveted B-side, because you couldn't separate the A-side from the B-side. Anyway, they basically, Gary Winfrey said, and this is almost the direct quote, we felt like they were giving us the old heave-ho. They were like, yeah, nice, don't call, we'll call you, don't call us, kind of thing. And they go home and they kind of feel dejected or whatever. But that's their first foray into meeting the Morgans. But of course, the Wilsons have known the Morgans for 10 years. Going back to spring of 1958, Hite Morgan calls Murray Wilson and he says, listen, Art LeBeau, a big disc jockey in Los Angeles, is putting a new record label together and he wants to record Dorinda Morgan's song Chapel of Love. And it's not the same one by the Dixie Cups, it's a different Chapel of Love. Um, and Hite tells Murray, I'd like Brian to come in. And Brian is almost 16 because he would have been 16 that June. And this is probably April or May of 58. And he says, I like Brian to audition for their song because I know he's got this nice, beautiful, high crystal tenor. And so he comes in, Brian auditions. Unfortunately, the tape was not saved, as far as I can tell. That would have been a really cool thing to hear. And Art LeBeau decides to go with a singer by the name of Rodney Gooden instead of Brian Wilson. The feeling I think that Dorinda had was that Brian was too young, perhaps. I'm not sure if that's true or not. He's 16, a little young, but that's wasn't unheard of back then in rock and roll. Anyway, he declines Brian's participation in the record. The record comes out by a group called the Hitmakers, which was sort of this Frankenstein group kind of thing. Val Pluto of the Jaguars, another guy from the Calvains, all these different R&B groups that Hite Morgan was working with. They were kind of like musical chairs. They put together this new group called the Hitmakers. And unfortunately, you name your band the Hitmakers, and that's the kiss of death because the record sank like a stone, and it wasn't a hit at all. And Dorinda always mused whether or not it would have been a hit had Brian sang it. So that was in '58. So Brian has known of the Morgans, and the Morgans would come over to Audrey and Murray Wilson's house all the time, and Audrey and Murray would go to the Morgans' house. So they were family friends for at least 10 years before the Beach Boys hit. So the Wilsons are pretty much entrenched and very, very familiar with Hite and Dorinda Morgan. Al has just met them recently, but these two things are happening separately. So the whole story of, surfing is, Dennis and Mike are Mike is married at the time. He's got a baby on the way. Dennis is 17, living the quintessential carefree life. Dennis, you see a picture of him as a 17-year-old kid. He's well built, he's handsome, he's tan, he's a surfer, he's a fighter. The women just adore him. And he's out there surfing, and him and Mike are talking on the pier, and they're like, all this music coming out about surfing, but it's all instrumental and guitar music. Somebody should sing about surfing, actually write a song and write some lyrics. And they're like, well, between Brian and Mike was pretty, had a good facility with English literature and writing, and was a big Chuck Berry fan, and how Chuck Berry could, tell a story through song lyrics. And they're like, well, we can do this ourselves, So they come home from that day at the beach and fishing, and they get all excited, and they tell Carl about it, and why don't we try to write a song? So somewhere probably in August of 1961, they start writing Surfing. And Surfing is a three chords, 2 minutes, simple song. But you listen to the lyrics of Surfing, and those are Mike Love's first really attempt at lyrics, and they're in my opinion, fantastic. I mean, they're really, really good lyrics. The way he tells the whole day at the beach of surfing, from listening to the radio reports to actually being at the beach and surfing. And then when the day is over, coming home exhausted and tired and having a great day at the beach surfing. Really, really good storytelling there. So they write this song, and Dennis contributes a lot of uncredited lyrics. And they've got this song together. And on September 15th, 1961, Murray arranges for them to write a standard songwriting contract with Hite Morgan, his music publisher. So again, with Guild Music, they sign over the publishing rights to Surfin', written by Brian Wilson, Mike Love, September 15th, 1961. They give the publishing rights to Hite Morgan. So now Hite's got this song, but they're very crude as far as singing together. They haven't completely gelled. They're good. The raw talent is there, and that's evident, but they need a lot of rehearsal. And this is September 15th. This is about a week after school starts. So Carl and Dennis are going to Hawthorne High School. Al and Brian are both doing their second year of college at El Camino Community College. But they probably haven't met yet. It's a big campus, and I don't think they have met by September. Shortly after that, they do meet. They literally run into each other on campus. So Al still has hopes, to perhaps resurrect the Islanders after coming back from Michigan. Gary Winfrey is back there. Bob Barrow has gone to Salt Lake City. Bob Barrow is out of the picture. But Gary Winfrey has another brother, Don Winfrey, who has some musical talent. So Al's hopes are reforming the Islanders, I think, and getting something going with that. And he has this tentative connection with Hite Morgan, courtesy of Murray and Audrey Wilson. Brian, Mike, Carl, and Dennis, that's a quartet. And Brian is modeling his new group after the four freshmen. And he's thinking, okay, where are the voice stack going to be? I'm going to be up high. Mike is going to be down low. And Carl and Dennis are going to be in the middle. And Dennis had a nice voice at that time, but not quite as perfect as what Jardine's voice would be as far as fitting into the vocal stack. But Brian is working with that. And he couldn't use Dennis for every song. He could use Dennis for certain songs, but not all the songs. But that's the beginning of that band. And then the momentous occasion of, and I can never quite pin down the date, and it probably never will be able to pin down the date. But Al and Brian run into each other on campus, and they say, hey, they know each other from high school, and and they're talking music and they're talking songs of the day and what they're working on and what they like, and they literally go into a piano room in the music building. And they just start, Brian is playing piano and they're singing songs of the day that they like, probably Kingston Trio, Four Freshmen, top 10 radio hits. They get kicked out of that room. A class comes in and says, hey, we reserved this room, get out, so they pick up their stuff and they leave and they go to a nearby building on campus. That's basically the nurses unit. And there's a football player laid up there from a scrimmage accident. He twisted his ankle or something. And they enlist him as a vocalist, and he's got this deep bass voice, but he really can't carry a tune. So they're singing and they're just kind of, playing around kind of thing. But then the pivotal thing, Brian says, he says, my brother Carl, and Al is like, oh yeah, I remember Carl. I remember Carl from that high school assembly back in Hawthorne High School. Well, Carl's got a really good voice, and he plays guitar. Carl got an acoustic electric guitar, a K guitar from Sears for Christmas of 1958. So Carl's been playing guitar now for a good, almost 3 years, and getting better. He took a couple of lessons too from a professional guitarist. And my cousin Mike Love's got a really good voice. Why don't you come over and you can sing with us? So Jardine, he takes him up on the offer, and I think probably within days, certainly less than a week, he's over at the Wilson's house. So now you got Brian, Carl, and Dennis, the nucleus of the Wilson brothers, cousin Mike Love, and they all meet Al. And I think up until that point, Dennis, Carl, and Mike probably had never met Al. And they meet Al and they start singing. And of course, they start singing Their Hearts Were Full of Spring and other songs. I think Brian may have even had a rough version of Surfer Girl. Brian has always said that first Surfer Girl was the first song he ever wrote. And the strong inference is that it predated surfing, which I've always kind of struggled with. It's like, okay, you wrote Surfer Girl before surfing? My head had a hard time digesting that. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but Brian has always said that he wrote that when he was 19 and it was his first song, and clearly written for Judy Bowles, who was a surfer and who had a big wooden board, and she was a bit of a tomboy, and she would surf all her free time. And Brian probably, I always theorized he would watch her from the shore, and all the lyrics, when you listen to the lyrics of Surfer Girl, that's him watching her on the surfboard. So anyway, at these sessions, they get together, but as late as I think October 12th it is, October 12th, 1961, Brian is writing in his college notebook, a spiral bound notebook that, pages that you pull out. And he writes on top the Pendletones, because that's what they were calling themselves. They have the Pendleton plaid shirt made up in Oregon that surfers would wear sometimes on the chilly nights at the beach. It was a nice wool shirt, actually. And they were going to call themselves the Pendletones because, bands at the time, there were the Surf Tones, there was Dick Dale and the Dell Tones. So they were going to be instead of Pendleton, which is the name of the shirt, a little play on words, they were going to be the Pendletones. Interestingly, to this day, and just last year when I saw him at an airport, Al Jardine maintains that the name of the band was the Pendletons, just like the shirt, Tons. Everything else that I've been able to uncover, though, is Pendletones. What the truth is, I don't know. If I was a betting man, I would go with Pendletones, though. But they had hoped to the company rather would sponsor them, and they would get free shirts sent to them, kind of thing. That's how naive their ambition was at that time. So they're calling themselves the Pendletones, and October 12th, Brian writes in his college notebook, he writes the Pendletones, and he writes 4 names: Brian, Mike, Dennis, and Carl, and he writes their ages. and that's it. And no mention of Al Jardine, no mention of his age, nothing at all. So as of October 12th, 1961, Al is really not in the band yet. So when he becomes a member of the band, it's pretty quick because, Surfin' is out, I think by November 27th is when it's released. So somewhere between October 12th and November 27th, Al becomes a member of the group. But I think Brian had always envisioned the group as a quartet, modeled after the Four Freshmen, but then realizes that Jardine's voice fits a lot of his songs and the harmony stack a lot better than his brother Dennis. So they bring him on. And then, of course, the pivotal Murray and Audrey going to Mexico City with some business associates of Murray's, that happens in mid-November. The old days, the story was, and it was apocryphal and so wrong and so misleading and drove so many Beach Boy writers and historians crazy because it was supposed to be Labor Day. And it was like, well, how could they be rehearsing Surfin' on Labor Day when, it hadn't even been, put in with the publisher until September 15th. It just didn't make sense, the chronology. So it turns out that the trip actually was in mid-November, which makes a lot more sense. So by mid-November, Jardine is certainly in the fold. Murray and Audrey go away to Mexico City, probably for no more than a long weekend, maybe 3 nights and 4 days. They leave Brian $80 of mad money or emergency money. She stocks the kitchen with food. Just in case something happens, here's $80. Try not to spend it. I don't think the plane had taken off from LAX yet, and the money was gone. And Al comes up with the idea, well, we need to get serious about this. If we're gonna raise our musical, chops to another level, we need to rent some instruments. Carl's got an acoustic electric guitar. Brian's got his upright piano. Dennis doesn't have anything yet at all. Mike doesn't have any instruments at all. And Al's got an acoustic guitar. So they've got two guitars, but they need more. And, Al had rented a stand-up bass when he was with the Islanders, so he knew where to get it. He knew which store rented the instruments. He knew how much they cost. And it was in Lawndale, California, a store called Hogan's House of Music. And he says to the other guys this weekend, again, Murray and Audrey are out of the picture. The boys have the house to themselves. And he says, we can rent instruments at Hogan's. I can rent a stand-up bass. We can get a snare drum. We can rent a microphone and a microphone stand. And we can try to elevate, to another level, which is what they do. But they need money. So they go over to Virginia Jardine and Donald Jardine's apartment in Torrance. They sit around the floor and they sing Surfin', probably with their acoustic guitars. And then they sing, I think, an a cappella version of Their Hearts Were Full of Spring. Virginia Jardine loves it, and she goes to the bank, and she gets $300 out and signs the guarantor slip, I think, to guarantee the safe return of the instruments. And they go to Hogan's House of Music, and that's all they rent. I think they rent the snare drum, the stand-up bass, a microphone, and a microphone stand. I don't think they rent any guitars, although Hogan's, I talked to a guy who worked back there actually at that time. He did not remember the Beach Boys coming in to rent the instruments. But he told me all about they carried Gibson, they carried Rickenbacker, I think they carried Fender. So Carl and Al could have had a chance to rent a really cool guitar back then, but I don't think they did. I think they just had their acoustic guitar, Carl's acoustic electric, which he could plug into an amp. The snare drum for Dennis, the story that Al tells these days from his storyteller shows that he does as a solo artist is he forgot the drumsticks. So leading to at the session where Brian is using his fingers to tap on the snare drum, as they're all gathered around one microphone. The Morgans rehearsed them to the point where they're like, okay, we're going to rehearse at home again, 2511 Mayberry Street in the Silver Lake district of Los Angeles, the front room. And there's a little architectural plan of the house and the recording area in my book. And they rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, and Hite makes some demos of them recording, and they're doing 3 songs. They're doing their original Surfin', and then Dorinda has 2 songs of her own. She's got a song called Lavender, about her favorite color and her favorite scent, and she's got a song called Luau, which is credited to Bruce Morgan, but actually written by Dorinda Morgan. Dorinda loved to encourage everybody to write songs. She thought everyone had a songwriter potential inside of them, and that it was not that hard and you could write a song. So she was encouraging her son Bruce to write it, and by doing so, she would give him credits for songs that he wrote. So, and Bruce freely admitted that to me, that I didn't write Luau. Maybe I contributed a word or two or a line here or there, but it was largely my mother. So they have these three songs, and of course, again, this goes back to what I was saying about B-sides. They knew Surfing was going to be the A-side, and they thought, well, if this had any kind of hit potential, our song will be on the B-side, and it'll either be Luau or Lavender. And as it turns out, it was Luau. And Lavender stays in the can for 20 years. They do all their rehearsals and demos at the Morgan home, and then he says, okay, I think you're finally ready. And this is probably somewhere in mid-November, before Thanksgiving, probably early to mid-November. They go into Stereo Masters, again owned by Hite and Dorinda Morgan on Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles, and they cut the master versions of Surfin' and Luau. And Hite makes a demo and an acetate, and he starts shopping it around like he has been doing for years and years and years with all his other records. And he goes to his friend Bill Angel, an Italian immigrant. His real name was Bill Fioravente, but he shortened it to Bill Angelo Fioravente rather, and he goes by Bill Angel. And he's the record librarian at KFWB rather, the monster radio station in Los Angeles, probably 40% market share. And he's the guy that pulls records for the disc jockeys, and he's got this huge library of 45s and 33s and 78s and everything. And Bill listens to it. Hite plays it for Bill, and Bill says, "Yeah, I like it. It's kind of catchy. It's a good tune. Why don't you go down the hall to Candix Records and see my good friend Joe Saraceno?" And Saraceno is the artist and repertoire, or A&R guy, for Candix. Candix is a real small label owned by twin brothers, Robert and Richard Dix. Robert goes by Bob. Two other brothers were silent partners, Sherman and Al, and a very, very small record label. They've been out since September of 1960, so they've been around for about 15 months now. They had a pretty good size hit with Candix 314, their 14th release on the label, with a song called Underwater by the Frogmen. Hit really did well locally. But they're having a hard time keeping the money. They're head above water and staying fluid financially. Anyway, Saraceno likes the record, and he says, "Yeah, let's sign him and get this out right away." And back in the day, when a record was recorded, when you took a song or a group into a studio and you recorded a song and you were happy with the master take and you had it on an acetate, it didn't take long to have it in record stores. I mean, the speed that these things happened was just, it would make your head spin. You once you agreed and you had the financing, and it wasn't that expensive. You took it to a mastering plant. They made the masters, they made the stampers. They put out 10,000 records probably. It wasn't that expensive. You could literally record a song on a Monday and have it in the record store probably Wednesday or Thursday. It could happen that fast. And I think that's what happened with Surfing. I think they recorded in mid-November. I think it's out by November 27th, and it starts to really sell like hotcakes. Luau is the flip side, so the Morgans are happy with that. They're getting the publishing for both Surfing and Luau, and also the songwriting credit for Bruce Morgan, aka Dorinda Morgan, for Luau. It's part of a battle of the bands on one radio station. I think it was KRLA, where they play three songs and people had to phone in their vote kind of thing. And Judy Bowles told me how, like, what they would call the radio station tens and dozens of times, and she said, my mother showed me the phone bill and all the phone calls up to the radio station, and then everybody was voting for Surfing. And Brian tells this great story of, they'd call up and they disguise their voice and, I want to vote for Surfing, and then, oh, I want to vote for Surfing, and at the end of the contest, Surfing wins. And what it won was basically a really heavy rotation. They would play it like once an hour. And it starts to sell out. The record stores can't get it, Candix can't keep enough copies in the record store. So Candix is in financial trouble. The printing press where they would print their records has this outstanding bill. They refuse to press any more copies of Surfing until Bob Dix pays his outstanding bill. Well, Bob Dix has no money to pay the bill. And his conundrum is, I got this hit record. I need to press more copies of it. It's going up the charts like crazy. And I can't keep record stores supplied. But my pressing plant refuses to press any more records unless I pay the bill. So he comes up with this brilliant idea of creating a subsidiary of Candix, which he calls X, just the letter X, X Records. Brand new record company, brand new publishing, pressing plant, starts all over again and gives it the same inaugural number of 301 that he did for Candix. So Surfin' comes out around December 20th. There's a telegram dated December 19th, 1961 from Bob Dix to Al Levine of Alco Research and Engineering, which is the second published printing press that Bob Dix used. So that's dated December 19th. That's the deal, basically. Levine agrees to press it on X301. Bob Dix says, yeah, but I retain the rights to the Beach Boys. And that record is probably in record stores December 20th or December 21st, days before Christmas. Has a distribution problem getting out to record stores, not just in California, but forget the rest of the country. I don't think the Surfin' on X301 ever sees the Midwest or the East Coast. There are anecdotal stories of the Beach Boys selling that record at record hops and dances and things like that. They would play a 30-minute set, and then you could buy a copy of Surfin' on X. So Surfin' has a distribution problem. That's where Herb Newman comes in. Herb Newman owns Era Record Sales, ERA. And Herb Newman's thing was he would hear a hit record on the charts. He would know that it was a small record company with no distribution ability, and he had a pretty good distribution network. And he would go in and buy the rights to that song, and he would repress it on the same label, same number for continuity's sake. But he would put a little notation at the 9 o'clock location on the record label, distributed by Era Record Sales. So that's where you see Surfin' 301 Era Record Sales. That comes out January, probably 15th, January 14th, January 15th, 1962. And that gives the song a little bit more life, because Newman has a bit of a marketing and distribution muscle, so he can get the record all across the country. So it stalls at like 74, 75, I think, in Billboard and Cashbox. It would have done better had it had a stronger distribution network behind it earlier. So from January to March, it's on the charts. And then March 17th, 1962, Surfin' drops from the charts. It's gone completely. And the Beach Boys are left thinking, okay, what do we do now? We don't want to go back to Candix because they're kind of a hot mess. They're kind of in a financial ruin. They don't really have the money to kind of really promote us. Well, we've got 4 songs that are pretty good in the can, because Hite Morgan brings them into World Pacific Recording Studio on February 8th of 1962. So as 62 kicks off, Surfin' is going up the charts. January 15th, it gets this big boost from Herb Newman, and it gets much wider distribution on Herb Newman's Era Records, supporting the Candix record, basically. And then February 8th, 3 weeks later, roughly, Hite Morgan takes them into World Pacific Studio, where they record 4 songs: Surfer Girl, Surfin' Safari, Judy, obviously written for Judy Bowles, and an instrumental that Carr wrote called Karate or Beach Boys Stomp. They do those 4 songs. They add Surfin' and Luau to the AFM recording contract. If you ever see a copy of that recording track, there's 6 songs listed on that. They do not record Surfin' and Luau on February 8th, of course. They just added them to that contract to make them legal with the union. They just do those 4 songs. So the interesting kind of thing there is, okay, they've got these 4 songs in the can. Judy's a B-side. Beach Boys Stomp would be a B-side. But they've got Surfer Girl and Surfin' Safari. They've got a clear follow-up hit record and 2 future, big songs for them. But they don't know what to do with them. They don't want to release the Hite Morgan version. Brian's not happy with it. It's not well produced, and it's a very special song in Brian's heart for probably multiple reasons. If it's truly the first completed song that he ever wrote, and he wrote it for his girlfriend, Judy Bowles, it has a special place in his heart. So he wants to handle it, gently, and he wants to make sure that it's right. So he holds it back. He holds it back for quite a while, actually. But then there's Surfin' Safari. So what happens in January too, right around the time that Herb Newman's Era Records picks up Surfin', the Wilson brothers are rehearsing in their home, and Gary Usher, who's a bank teller with his own recording career, and marginal. He's not doing great kind of thing, but he's got years of experience with the record industry and music publishing, and he's grown by the school of hard knocks. He knows what to do and what not to do. He knows where the sharks are. He knows where where all the liars are and the cheaters are in the recording industry, and how to protect your money and yourself and things like that. So he's got some experience, real world experience. He's in the Hawthorne area visiting his Uncle Benny, and his Uncle Benny says, "Hey, the Wilson brothers have got a band together. I've heard, they got a song out on the charts called Surfing. Why don't you go over and knock on the door and introduce yourself?" So Usher does that. He goes over there, knocks on the door, and Brian answers. And they just hit it off immediately. Within 20 minutes, they write Lonely Sea. They go on to write 409. They go on to write County Fair. They go on to write a number of songs on the Surf and Safari album. And of course, later In My Room. And they hit it off right away. And that is a pivotal moment in the early days of the Beach Boys, because when Surfin' drops off the charts in mid-March of '62, they are floundering. They don't want to go to Candix, and they have no record label at all. And they don't know if their shot in their music industry is over. They have no idea what's going on. So Gary Usher tells Brian basically, listen, you got to get off the couch, and I'm going to give you a bit of a kick in the ass here, because they're not going to come knocking on your door. You got to get out there and knock on some doors, and let's go into Western Recorders. He was familiar with it. He had made some demos at Western. He knew Chuck Britz, the recording engineer there. He said, let's go into Western. Let's re-record Surf and Safari. Let's record a version of 409. Let's do our own recording and control our own sound, and I'll introduce you to a professional recording studio and Chuck Britz. That happens in mid-April of '62, probably the 14th, the 15th, 16th, around there. They record a whole bunch of songs. They record like 4 songs that Usher has written either with Brian or Roger Christian, another disc jockey in LA. Some of them are for Gary Usher's career and, with his career in mind. And then some of them are, with the Beach Boys in mind, but that becomes the pivotal demo that Murray Wilson then takes and says, okay, I've got something now that I can shop around. I've got a 409 Surf and Safari, literally written Surf + Safari on the demo, Surf and Safari instead of Surf and Safari. They put Judy on there too from the Hite Morgan sessions. They spliced that on there. Lonely Sea, beautiful song that the first song that Brian wrote with Gary. And then, in Murray's marketing savvy, he knows that Capitol Records has been the home of the 4 Freshmen and the Kingston Trio and the 4 Preps, all harmony groups. So, and he's got the Beach Boys. He's got his 3 sons, his nephew, and Al Jardine. And he figures he's got a shot at Capitol Records because Capitol is in desperate need of a young group. 4 Freshmen star is starting to fall. The Kingston Trio, their records are not charting as well as they had been. 4 Preps are up and down a little bit. They're looking for the new young sound, and the boys, the Beach Boys, can fill that bill pretty well. So Murray has this idea of, you guys sing Their Hearts Were Full of Spring, which, a beautiful song, great song to show off your talents. They record an a cappella version of that, and Murray splices it onto the end of the demo tape. Gary, he's calling everybody. He's calling Dot Records. He's calling Original Sound. He's calling Columbia. He's calling Decca. He finally gets an interview at Capitol, but he talks to the country western guy at Capitol. This guy had played, I think, a couple of songs that Murray had written for some country western artists back in the day. So this guy had done Murray a square one. He had done him a favor. So Murray knows this guy at Capitol, and he arranges for this box of tapes, all these demos that he's collected from Hite Morgan sessions and the April sessions at Western with Chuck Britz, and he leaves them on his desk. When the guy's like, "Well, what am I going to do with this? I'm country western. I'm not pop or rock and roll." And you got to remember, this is April of 1962. So he says, "Let me bring them over to Nick Vinay. Nick Vinay is our young hotshot producer. He's young. He's in his early 20s, 23, 24, something like that." And he's our rock and roll pop guy. He'll know what to do with these. He puts them on Nick Vinay's desk, and they sit there for like a week or two. And Murray's calling, hey, have you listened to them yet? Have you listened to them yet? Anyway, they finally get a meeting. I think it's around May 8th, 1962. Gary Usher, Brian Wilson, Murray Wilson go up to meet with Nick Vinay. They play him the tapes. Vinay later says, I knew it was a hit, Surfing Safari, the moment I heard it, 10 seconds into the needle drop, I knew it was going to be a hit record. He arranges for them to get a contract. They sign a contract May 24th, 1962 with Capitol Records. June 4th, a mere, 2 weeks later, not even, Surfing Safari Back with 409 is out in record stores with a great picture sleeve of them holding the surfboard, horizontally, and they're off and running. Gary Usher tells the story that while they're in Nick Vinay's office, Vinay knew that all the money in music is in the music publishing. It's not being the recording artist, although that's, can be financially lucrative. It's not in the songwriting, that can be financially lucrative too. But all the money, especially the long-term money, if you got a hit record, is in owning the music publishing. Usher knew that from his school of hard knocks, his early forays into the music industry. So Nick Vinay says, well, who you boys got the publishing with, and he wants to sign them up to Capitol's in-house music publishing company. And Usher says, oh, that's okay. Let's call a timeout here. We've got our own music publishing company, which is not true at all. Right. And they go back down the elevator, Murray, Brian, and Gary. And supposedly, the story goes that Usher told before he passed was Murray just was explosive. He was like, what are you doing? We don't have a publishing company. Why did you lie to Nick Vinay? It could have soured the whole deal. You could have screwed the whole deal. And Usher's like, Murray, you don't want to give away the publishing. You want to have your own publishing company. That's where all the money is. So anyway, that's where Sea of Tunes gets born. So and that move alone, you can't even calculate the amount of money that saved the Wilson family and the Beach Boys and their extended family to this day, the children and the children's children. So that was a huge positive move that Gary Usher did for Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys in general. So they formed Sea of Tunes. There's a picture of the original Sea of Tunes label in my book. It wasn't called Sea of Tunes. It was called Murray Wilson Music, which I really got a kick out of because it's like, okay, here's Murray with his ego and his, intrusion into the boys' musical career. And I'm not a Murray knocker. I'm sort of neutral on Murray. I think he did a lot of great things. I think he did a lot of things where he didn't know when to pull back and let the boys run their own career. But he was their father, and no one rooted for them more than him. And they would not have been signed, I don't think, to Capitol if it wasn't for Murray Wilson. But yeah, the first music publishing company is going to be called Murray Wilson Music, which I thought that's just too funny. Murray inserting himself into the publishing with his own name. So anyway, somewhere along the lines, it gets changed to the much more romantic and much more clever Sea of Tunes kind of thing, and that's where all their music is published, and that's where they amass their wealth basically, because these songs go on to be phenomenal in radio and TV commercials and movies. And every time they're licensed, that music publishing company makes money. Every time they're heard on the radio, that music publishing, makes money.
All right, Jake, do you want to go into the song discussion? Just kind of like.
Yeah, sure. So we wrote down a list of songs from the early years from the Hite and Dorinda Morgan sessions that we wanted to just kind of discuss and just give our opinions on. So the first one that I wrote down was Surfin'. So I know that there's various takes of this that were recorded. I listened to the one that was included on the playlist that Riley made for us to listen. I thought that this recording sounded pretty similar to the released version, but I thought that the vocals were more prominent on this, which I thought was kind of cool. And the song also seems to be in a lower key, at least to me. I don't know if it was recorded in a lower key or if it's just something with the recording, but maybe you can confirm that, Jim. I will say, I've said this before, but I'm not the biggest fan of Surfin', but I do appreciate the historical aspect of the song, it being their first single. And it is cool to hear this early demo version. And I do think Mike has a cool vocal on it. So that's pretty much my thoughts on Surfin'.
Yeah. It's not Pet Sounds. It's certainly not Smile, but it's where it all begins. And I think the cool thing about it is the lyrics is, it shows Mike Love's facility writing lyrics right out of the gate. And again, if you just read them as a story, they're really, really good lyrics. And and he's got this facility with a very fast-paced vocal kind of thing. You know, hearing so many versions of it over and over again gets a bit tedious. I do think they play with the tape speed a little bit too sometimes. You know,
Mhm.
sometimes by speeding up the tape, it can make them sound younger and maybe even changing the key kind of thing. So, but it was, very rudimentary. I mean, this is their first crack out of the gate. So when you think about it, it's like, well, again, they were pretty talented right out of the gate, right, right from the beginning.
My opinion of surfing is I think it's a little primitive, but I think for a first go around, it's pretty solid. I do agree that Mike wrote some pretty nice lyrics. They're very descriptive, like you can kind of almost close your eyes and kind of see it all happening. What's kind of cool too is that if I'm not mistaken, isn't that Brian like putting his shirt on the drum and kind of banging the drum a little bit
Right.
on the final
Yeah.
recording?
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. And it's almost kind of proto-punk in a way, I kind of think. Like a lot of this early Beach Boy stuff is almost like very garagey proto-punky, so that's kind of really cool. A lot of the early stuff, I could almost hear the Ramones take it, speed up times two, put it on a Ramones album. So I like it for what it is, but it is definitely a bit primitive. But I think it's a very good start for the group. I don't care for the version that they re-recorded on Summer in Paradise, though. That was a disaster.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that.
Yeah, we don't.
No, I agree. I feel like musically it's a bit primitive. I mean, it's complete opposite of Brian's strong songwriting abilities in terms of like putting together a melody. But I mean, at the same time, when he wrote this, he was like, what, 19 or something? It was like and Surfer Girl may have been his like first song, but this was like the first one he like clearly put hours into. And you hear all the different recordings of it. You can tell that they really thought they had something here, and they did, clearly. I do think Mike's vocal is very strong on this one, probably stronger than the actual release on Capitol, and maybe it's just because he has that energy putting into like the demo recording, and then my Capitol version, I mean, like he's done that song what like 1,000 billion times. It's like I mean, even I'd be tired of it. I get tired of like recording songs that I've written, like so I clearly get it. But I feel like the energy here is like Matt said, a bit more garage, a bit more punky compared to the Capitol release. But I actually prefer this one a little bit more, if just for the vocal. Instrumentation on both versions, there's not a whole lot to talk about.
Yeah.
All right, so the next song we want to talk about, Luau, which, as Jim mentioned, was the B-side to Surfin' and was written by members of the Morgan family. I think this is a catchy little song. I don't think it's anything too special. I can see why it was just a B-side, but I think it's okay. I do like that bridge section sung by Brian, the "Don't Need to Live in the Islands to Have a Lot of Fun" part. I like the way that he sings that. I think it's a good vocal from Brian. And I also like, I believe it's Dennis singing the "Girls with the Hula, Boys Will All Sing" part. I like his vocal on that as well. But I think it's actually a pretty solid track. I think quality-wise, it's actually pretty close to Surfin'. But I can see why it was a B-side for sure. So that's my thoughts on Luau.
Yeah.
Jim?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was waiting for you to matter Riley to talk. Okay. Yeah, basically, it is a cute song. Jardine does it live sometimes, recently. And again, they were not looking to Brian and Mike for another song. They wanted that B-side for their own material. Hite was a songwriter himself. Dorinda was a songwriter herself. They seldom wrote together. And then she encouraged Bruce to write the song. So Bruce gets the writing credit, but it's truly written by Dorinda Morgan. And she used to pick Dennis's brain. She was like, give me surfing terms. She knew nothing about surfing at that time. She's in her probably mid to late 40s at the time. She didn't really know anything about the surfing scene. So she relied on Dennis for terminology and things like that. But her idea was like, well, we'll have this little party. And the surfer girls will sit over here and the surfer boys will sit over here. And we'll have this little luau kind of thing. So it's this cute little song about, what surfing parties were like with the bongos and the potato chips or the guitars and things like that. So, but it does hold up. It's and again, very, you have to take it for the time, for the fall of '61, and for the fact that this is their first efforts in the studio.
Basically everything you said. It's very, it's cute, it's charming. I do like that Dennis has a little line in there. Brian sings his line well. I think it's a fun little ditty. It's not like anything like a masterpiece or anything, but like I said, for a B-side for a first single, you could do a lot worse.
Yeah, this is like about the best B-side you could probably put to Surfin'. It's very primitive, I would argue, in some cases in terms of songwriting, maybe as primitive as Surfin'. I don't know. There is a bridge, which I don't think Surfin' has.
Mhm.
And I do like that bridge. I really like Brian's vocal on it. And I'm glad that other members are kind of getting like some moments to shine with their vocals.
Mm,
I think that's really cool. And I think it's probably the first time that's truly happened in a Beach Boys song that was put to recording.
mm,
But like the best is yet to come. I mean, it's still very primitive, and the songwriting itself, in terms of lyrics, is still very primitive. I know none of the boys wrote it, but like, and you go from surfing to luau, it's really following the trend rather than setting it, which is something that the Beach Boys would do.
mhm,
So, all right.
All right, so we'll move on to the next track, which is Lavender. I just think this is a really beautiful a cappella piece. I think the vocal harmonies on this are really strong.
mm,
You can already hear at this early point how well the voices blend together
mm.
on this. So I really do like it quite a bit. And I'm somebody that's not really a huge fan of a lot of these a cappella songs, but I do think that this one's really pretty just because the vocal harmonies on it are just beautiful. So say about it, but I think it's a really pretty track.
Yeah, it is. And when Lavender first came out on Lost and Found, the Steve Hoffman release of these Hite Morgan recordings, and my hat's off to Steve Hoffman because he tracked Bruce Morgan down. He flew out to his home. They listened to the tapes. He flew home with the original tapes. He remastered them. He put out Lost and Found. And when that CD came out in like 1992, and Beach Boy fans, myself included, heard Lavender for the first time. To hear a new Beach Boys song from like 61, 62 was unheard of. No one had ever heard of this song. And it was a beautiful a cappella song. Well, actually, I don't think it's truly a cappella. I think there's, because Al plays a stand-up bass in it. So it might have a very faint musical track in it because I just remembered Al is really proud to this day that he was able to play the stand-up bass on it and figure out a bass line for it pretty much on the spot, not with a lot of preparation. And again, it was, Dorinda's favorite scent, her favorite color kind of thing. It was a song that she wrote. It was close to her heart. Um, Bit of a sad song when you listen to the lyrics, actually. And she probably just dusted it off and she had a lead sheet and showed it to them. And they recorded a couple of versions. It stayed in the can for all those years until Steve Hoffman and DCC, Compact Disc brought it out on Lost and Found, and it was a gem. It was just one of those hidden gems where you're like, oh, what else is in the can? Unfortunately, that was it. But interesting how she didn't choose that to be the B-side to Surfing. For some reason, if she wasn't happy with the version, or she just wanted Luau to be out there because it matched thematically, Luau matched the record better than Lavender would. Yeah.
I think this is a very haunting, melancholy tune, with the lyrics and everything. I think it's very beautifully sung. If I'm not mistaken, I think Steve Hoffman, it took him quite a bit of convincing for Bruce Morgan to put this on the CD. And I really, really love the song. It's a beautiful tune. I kind of can see why it wasn't chosen as a B-side because I think thematically Luau is more fitting. But I do think it's a really, really pretty song, and I'm very glad that we are able to hear it and it's been out. And, it's not the Beach Boys have a tendency of locking away many great songs in the vault. So I'm glad that we at least get to hear it finally.
Yeah, I think if had I not known that the Morgan or Dorinda Morgan wrote this, I probably might rank this as like one of my favorite Beach Boys songs, period. I love it. It's very like sad, very haunting, but also very beautiful. I think the melody is gorgeous. I can definitely see that if Brian wrote this, it's like straight up for freshmen. I think it definitely fits the boys, and I could see why she chose for them to sing it after dusting it off for years. Um, I feel like if Surfer Girl was released by the Morgans and who knows, like Candix or whatever in some alternate universe, I could see this being the B-side to it. Because I feel like both those songs just kind of fit together. Very beautifully written songs, great melodies. Very sad song, but I absolutely love it. It is easily my favorite from this set. And it's arguably one of my favorite Beach Boys songs. I just like it's hard to rank it compared to like stuff that the Wilsons wrote and all the great stuff that came after, but easily a gem from the early catalog and one of the best from the first couple of years in the band.
All right, we're going to Surf and Safari, the Morgan Sessions recording of this. So this one doesn't sound that much different to me from the officially released version, besides a few of the lyrics being different. I will say, though, I'm kind of with Riley. I know Riley said this for Surfing that he preferred Mike's vocal on the demo version. I prefer Mike's vocal on this recording than I do on the official one because it sounds a lot smoother and less nasally to me on this demo recording. I also saw that Mike said that he wrote both the words and the melody to this while Brian did the chords and vocal arrangements, which I think makes sense. But I do think it's a really catchy melody. It's one of my favorite of the boys' earlier songs, and I can see why it was a hit. I think it's a great song, and I think that I wish Mike's vocal was a little less nasally on the official version, because I think this demo version, his vocal is actually better. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been fond of the idea that they had this song in the can and they held it back. Murray was trying to get away from, I think, the Morgans kind of thing. In March 29th of 61, Murray basically hands the Morgans. There's this document called Letter of Intent and Agreement, where he basically serves the Beach Boys up on a silver platter and says, would you take them over? Would you manage them for 50% of all their future earnings? And that document was the heart of lawsuits for the next, 50 years. But they're struggling as to where to go. Again, Surfing's off the charts. They don't have a record deal. They're kind of been burned by Candix. They did not get the full royalty that they should have from Candix for the sales of Surfing. And they've got Surfing Safari. And, what do you do with it? They've got a Morgan version of it, but they're unhappy with, working with the Morgans. So this song is, stays in limbo for a while, until Nick Venet hears it and, and gets the muscle of Capitol Records behind it. It's funny, some people said like 409 was the hit, that when Capitol released Surfing Safari back to 409, that 409 was a hit. But Nick Venet always said, I always got a kick out of this. And I think he's got to be right. And he's making a point. He said, if 409 was the hit, why did I have them pose with a surfboard? He said Surfing Safari was the hit. That was the A side because they both became hits. It was their first double-sided hit. 409 did decent on the charts, not as well as Surfing Safari, but anyway, again, back to Surfing Safari. Again, just a good melody, a nice quick paced delivery on Mike's behalf, and highlights Mike Love's importance in the early days of the group, as Brian's first serious songwriting partner. Although very early on, Brian is writing songs with Gary Usher. He's writing songs soon with Roger Christian. So Brian was just, Brian had so much talent, he could write with so many different people. But it's a great example again of Mike's ability with lyrics, his ability to handle a fast-paced song. And it's just a cool song.
You want my take on it? I think it's a classic song. I could see why it was chosen as like the first single for Capitol. Yeah, now that you mention it, Jim, I don't understand why 409 would be the A side if they posed with a surfboard. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Then again, I recently found out that Capitol wanted Act Naturally to be the A side instead of Yesterday, if you can believe that. Wow. Doesn't make a lick of sense. Wow. Yeah, but anyway, I really like this song. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't this demo version licensed out to the Areola label in Germany?
Yeah, Hite Morgan basically, got an offer for the Areola label in Germany, like you said, Matt. And he basically spliced it a copy of it and sent it over there. I think they just basically pressed the wrong copy,
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't use the copy perhaps that they should have used. There was a mistake or a mismatch or whatever I'm trying to say. And then that became really collectible, the Areola version that came out of Germany. So
yeah. I think what's kind of interesting about this demo version is, like you said, Jake, the vocal is probably a little bit more refined, but also the lyrics I don't think are quite as good. I think that when they got the Capitol version, they refined the lyrics a bit more. I actually quite like about the Capitol versions where Mike has that little voice crack in it. I know I don't remember where it is because I haven't heard the song in a while, but there's that little voice crack. And it's like, that's something that I really like about some of those older recordings. It's like those imperfections that they leave in. I feel like nowadays, a lot of music is so overly processed and so overly slick that like anything like that, it's just going to be wiped away in 2 seconds with the use of a computer. So I quite like that. I think it's a classic. There's a reason it was a hit, and I think it was a great way to start off their Capitol career.
Mm-hmm. I kind of agree with Jake on this one. I think that the energy is honestly a bit more in this one than it is the Capitol release. I mean, obviously the Capitol release is iconic, but I feel like maybe not so much the lyrics, because I do prefer the lyrics on the later one, but the actual vocal delivery by Mike here is smoother and it has a bit more energy. I feel like I can hear the individual instruments in the version rather than like the compressed Capitol version. I feel like very punky. It very much has that like spice that the Capitol version doesn't quite reach with this one. Being said, the Capitol version is still very iconic. But I am glad they changed the lyrics, and I could almost get behind Mike coming up with the melody because it's very basic. Minus the little intro, it's just A, D, and E chords and not much else. So it's very primitive, but honestly, it's still very much a step up compared to surfing. So
Yeah. All right, so now moving on, we're going to the Surfer Girl demo. Uh, so I think that this is a really pretty demo recording. I feel like you can hear the beautiful harmonies on this song more with the instruments stripped back on this recording. I know from the one I listened to that Riley sent me, the intro was kind of starts right with the lyrics, and then that's it. Like, so you had that really iconic intro was not there. But I do think it's a really pretty demo. I think you could even argue that it's even more like intimate sounding, just because those harmonies are so prominent on this one. So I think it's a really solid recording, and you can definitely tell like this song had a lot of potential. And as Brian says, it was one of the first songs he ever wrote, and it's an amazing song. It's one of my favorites. So, what do you think of it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's you hear Surfer Girl, and if you're a Beach Boy fan and you've seen them in concert, especially if you're my age, it is so in your musical DNA as a
Mhm.
Beach Boy fan. There's not a single concert where they've not done it. They every single time. Um, so to hear early versions of it, these embryonic versions of it as it's coming together, is really special. It's really cool to hear those harmonies that they're working out. And they've rehearsed it, I'm sure, at home plenty of times, but it's still a work in progress. I love those rehearsal tapes. Brian is telling them, stand up, stand up straight and project out, and how to breathe and how to use a microphone and when to breathe. And they're still learning how to do it, basically. They didn't have a lot of formal training at all. So to get these, the fact that they've been preserved and finally released and for us to enjoy, yeah, it's a real gift. It's a real gift because it's such a special song. It's a beautiful song. It owes a lot to the melody of, When You Wish Upon a Star, which was on the charts by Dion and the Belmonts, I think, or maybe Dion as a solo artist. Dion had a version of it. Obviously, it came from the Disney movie too. So I think Brian probably, my theory is Brian's driving around Hawthorne in his car and he hears Dion's version and he's singing along and he's got that melody. And, he writes his own song to it. How much of the melody is borrowed, I'm not quite sure, but it certainly owes a debt to When You Wish Upon a Star. But beautiful song. Glad that he held back on it too. We get to hear these early versions of it, but he knew, I think, that it was something special. Because when you think about it, it's recorded with the Morgans February 8th of 62, but it doesn't get released until summer, I think it is, July of 63. So, probably a good 18 months later almost, or 16 months later. So he really hangs on to it. And it's kind of a beautiful image because it's Brian kind of protecting this song that is so special to him. Special because of, very early composition that he wrote by himself, and special because of his relationship with Judy.
Yeah, I think it's a really gorgeous song. I don't think, regardless of whatever version you're listening to, it's just a very pretty song. I know that this version, yeah, it's kind of interesting because, as you mentioned, Jake, you kind of strip back the instruments. It doesn't have that intro that everybody knows, but you could just really hear just like the beauty and the vocal harmonies and the arrangements. And I think it really shows like how talented Brian was as a songwriter at such a young age. Because I mean, he was what, like 19, 18, 19 when he wrote the song, even younger. I mean, he wrote it really young. It's a gorgeous song. And one last thing I want to say about When You Wish Upon a Star, I love that song too. There's a version I used to listen to a lot when I was a kid on one of those like old Disney sing-along VHSs that was like they went to Disneyland. At the very end, they sing the song, and it's just gorgeous. And it's just it's a beautiful song. That's the one I grew up listening to a lot. Because I didn't watch Pinocchio until I was older, probably like 11, 12. But yeah, I love this song. And this version is, like you said, it's nice to really hear it stripped back and you really get to hear the emphasis on those harmonies.
This particular version is, I would say, equally as good as a studio version, but for different reasons. I think it's very haunting. It's very similar to Lavender. I think there's slight instrumentation behind it. I think Al's doing bass on this one too. This really brings out the Four Freshmen influence on Brian when you hear this version rather than the other one, which is just much more of like a simple love ballad to a surfer girl named Judy Bowles. But like I said, I feel like it's so haunting, but still very beautiful, very similar to Lavender. I probably listen to the studio version a bit more, but still, I think on a for different reasons, it's just as good as the studio version. It's just really the vocals really pop on this one. Just wish they had a little bit of an intro there, but
Yeah.
it's still very beautiful.
Yeah. I think for me the intro for sure is what elevates the officially released version for me over this one. I do like the instrumentation on the officially released version too, but like we've said, it's really cool to hear the harmonies on this version with the really stripped back instrumentation. So really pretty song regardless of which recording you listen to of it. All right, the next track, Judy. So this song actually doesn't really do too much for me musically. I think it's a bit repetitive, and I don't find it that interesting. I will say I do like Brian's lead vocal on it. I think he sings it really well, and I do like Mike's parts as well. But honestly, I don't really have too much else to say about this one. I just don't think it's quite the strongest song. And I think that Brian's been involved in a lot better than this. So that's my thoughts on Judy.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair assessment, Jake. Actually, I kind of agree with you. And I think even the historical record kind of shows that. I mean, they had that in the can as of February 8th, 62, very, very early in their career, clearly written for Judy Bowles. And they never did anything with it. They could have put it on the Surf and Safari album when they needed songs. They didn't do it then. They never used it, you know. And then after 62, there was no need to use it. So it just sort of lingers there collecting dust. One thing of interest, though, is read the lyrics, and it's clearly autobiographical. They would fight a lot. You know, Judy and Brian had this sort of love-hate relationship. Big age difference. Judy's 14, Brian's 19. So there's a good 5 years difference between them, you know, which I found kind of, you know, a little fascinating, to be honest with you, you know, because I asked Judy at the time, I said I was very, you know, very respectful of her time. I said, but you were like 13 going on 14. He was like a college freshman. He was 19, you were 14. That's a big age difference. And but she said, no, not a big deal. Back then, my parents were fine with it. My stepdad was fine with it. My mom was fine with it, you know, and you know, not a big deal. But they would fight a lot. And they started to, you know, he's at a way different stage in his career and life than she is. You know, she's a freshman in high school. He is soon to become the creative force and genius of the Beach Boys. Their worlds just, you know, diverge dramatically, which he was okay with and had a very down to earth, accepting nature of it. But anyway, in the song, you know, it's about one of their fights. It's about, you know, getting back together and all, you know, the ups and downs of their relationship. But she loved the song. When I talked to her, and I got hours and hours of tapes with Judy, with her permission, of course. And she, you know, she loved the song because it was about her. It was about her. And not too long ago, I guess it was Capitol or EMI or whoever owns it now. You know, they issued a picture sleeve, and they issued Judy on a vinyl 45. I have it somewhere. I should have pulled it for the interview, but it's kind of a cool little 45 of Judy. You know, with the 45 with the color combination reminiscent of the Surf and Safari sleeve. So, but yeah, just a song that I think even Brian and the boys thought, you know, yeah, not ready for prime time.
I see it as kind of like a songwriting exercise. I think it has some nice vocals in it, some nice harmonies, but like you kind of said, Jake, it's a bit repetitive. Lyrically, it has some interesting lyrics, but it's not really fleshed out. I can kind of see why this didn't make anything, why it just kind of like sat in the can for so long. I know Hite used to license this out to a bunch of those cheapo record labels over the years, and some of those sound really awful. So I could definitely see why Steve Hoffman had to go hunt down the original tapes because my God, they sound terrible. But yeah, I think it's just like I said, it's cool as a document. It's nice as like a songwriting exercise, but it's not really something that I think is like the high point of Brian's songwriting career, the high point of the Beach Boys recording career. It's kind of where I'm at with it. I can see why it didn't really make anything. As much as I hate 10 Little Indians, at least it's more interesting than this.
Yeah.
I do think that this
100%.
one, the song Judy, like I kind of agree it is a songwriting exercise, but I do think there are some highlights that kind of show what's going to come next. But yeah, I do think that there's a lot of moments on here. I do like the little hook of Judy. I think that's really cool. This is Brian's first lead vocal with the band? Question mark.
Well, as of February 8th, everything that was recorded February 8th was Surf and Safari, Judy, Surfer Girl. So, you know, it's maybe tied for first. No?
Yeah, it's one of Brian's first lead vocals, and I do
Yeah.
think that is very charming. And I do really love Carl's guitar line at the end of one of the verses, like Judy. It's really cool. I think that's a good moment for Carl's guitar to shine. But yeah, it is mostly just a songwriting exercise. I don't think there's anything serious here. At the very best, it was probably just going to be considered for a B side of something, but can totally see why it wasn't released. Although I do think it probably would have had a good spot on Surf and Safari, the album.
All right, so next up we have Beach Boys Stomp, also known as Karate.
Mhm.
So this was an early kind of surf rock type instrumental. I think it's okay, but it doesn't really do much for me personally. I think they've done better instrumentals, and I can see why this didn't get an official release on any album. It's just an okay instrumental, but it's not something I ever really come back to. But some nice guitar playing, I assume, from Carl on this. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never been a big fan. I was never, but a lot of this is subjective, of course, as any great art is, and certainly music. I was never a big fan of instrumentals. There's some instrumentals I like, and I can admire them. I can admire it for the guitar playing and the facility and all that. Um, but my musical sensibilities were always, why not put lyrics to it? Even when I first heard Good Vibrations and my brother and I flipped it over and we heard, Let's Go Away for a While, we were like, what's this? I mean, it grew on us as a beautiful piece of music, especially when you hear it live. But at the time, we were like, oh, put Good Vibrations back on. We just didn't have the patience for instrumental music. So for Karate and Beach Boys Stomp, it was like this. Yeah, this was Carl, expressing his musical chops as a very young kid. But he'd been playing since '58, so he'd been playing 3 years. And he took some lessons with John Moss, later of the Walker Brothers, who David Marks had introduced Carl to John Moss, and they took some lessons with him, so a while. So he was pretty proficient, both him and David, for their age. They were pretty good on the guitar, but it was just something I think of the time. They wanted to show that they were perhaps a legitimate surf band because surf music was instrumental, and okay, we've got this, and you know, and where that karate yell at the end comes from, where it's the alternate title, who knows, it's like we'd love to be a fly on the wall as to where that came from, but anyway, Beach Boys attempt to get into the legitimate surf instrumental genre, and largely forgettable in my opinion.
I think it's cool as a document to hear Carl's playing at that point in time, kind of hear him show his chops and spread his wings a little bit. But as a song, it's all right. It's not the best surf instrumental they've ever done. There's much better on Surfing USA. It's not really that interesting, other than, like I said, as a curiosity kind of thing. It's there. I wouldn't turn it off if it comes on. I'm not going to choose to put it on. So I'm just kind of whatever about it. Like, I like it more as a curiosity kind of thing than anything else. That's where I'm at with Beach Boy Stomp, aka Karate.
As you guys know, I love the surf instrumentals from the band. That being said, I think how you guys think of the surf instrumentals is how I think of Beach Boys Stomp. I just don't care. I don't think there's like a whole lot going on. I can appreciate 14-year-old, 13-year-old Carl Wilson playing guitar. But like honestly, unlike songs like Let's Go Trippin' or Miserlou, where there is like something really interesting going on there and there's a lot of hype and energy, this is just a 1-4-5 chord progression with a little bit of a blues guitar over it. It's nothing special. I could probably reproduce this in my own bedroom when I was 14. So it's like nothing special with this one except for cool to hear Carl play guitar at a young age.
All right, so the next song we're going to talk about is Barbie, which was officially credited to Kenny and the Cadets at the time, but really it's a Brian Wilson recording. I think this is a decent song. I believe that the lyrics on this were by the Morgans. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, Jim. I'm not sure. Did Brian write the melody and the musical elements of this, Jim? Do you know?
No, the Beach Boys had nothing to do with the music or the lyrics.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think the melody of this is kind of reminiscent of Surfer Girl in a way. I can kind of hear that, even though Brian didn't actually write this. But I do think Brian's vocal really elevates this one for me. I think he sings it really, really sweetly. I also think Audrey Wilson's maybe on the bridge on this, I read. I like the bridge. I think it's a nice little bridge. And I think Carl provides some backing vocals as well. So this is one of the earlier songs I do actually come back to from time to time. Just because I think Brian sings it so pretty, and I think it really highlights his voice, even at this early stage. So pretty song, and I'm pretty sure it's like one of like the rarest Beach Boys related singles ever, because I think there were only like 100 copies of it made or something like that, right? Something
Yeah,
like that.
it's crazy rare. Yeah, I mean, the story goes that, Hype Morgan kind of called Murray and said, "Hey, can you have Brian and the boys come in and lend their vocals?" He had the track already recorded, and the boys were just going to come in and lay the vocals on top of the track. And kind of Murray did it as a favor, as a nod to their decade-long friendship, even though
Yeah.
they were starting to pull away from Hype Morgan at that point. I think Murray realized, wait a second, what do we need Hite and Dorinda Morgan for? They own the publishing to Surfer Girl, Surfing Safari, Judy, Karate, and Surfing. Um, let's not give them any more of the publishing pie, and let's pull away. We can do it ourselves. We can go into Western, work with Chuck Britz, and that opened up a whole new door for them. And that was the beginning of the end for the Morgans, as far as Brian and Murray, at Murray's instigation, they left the Morgans behind, basically. And I think that's a natural progression too. I think the Morgans realized that they were going to lose the Beach Boys. They probably wanted to keep them, obviously, for multiple reasons, not the least of which would be financial, but they were pulling away from them. So this was a favor. We'll come in and we'll sing Barbie for you. As far as the song itself, though, I like the song. It was written for the Barbie doll, which was written created right there in Hawthorne, California, by the Handlers, the husband and wife that created the Barbie doll. And it was, again, De Morgan's idea or ploy or scheme to kind of cash in on a marketing thing. The Barbie doll had been recently introduced. They were selling like hotcakes. And, I forget how many per day, Mattel used to put out this statistic of how many Barbies were being sold per day in the United States. There's crazy, crazy numbers. And they thought, hey, let's, cash in on that bandwagon and create a song called Barbie with Brian Wilson's great, lead vocal. But it didn't do anything. It never charted anywhere, never charted even on the local LA radio stations. I think it got some radio play, but not a lot. And that's anecdotal stories. So, but a cool record, and a great record to have as a record collector. And yeah, still enjoy listening to it, for Brian's vocal. And the fact that, how many, it might be the only record that Audrey sings on. I'm not sure. Maybe some other Beach Boy historian could correct me on that. But how many early records is the mother of the Beach Boys singing on? Cool record. Cool record.
So my take on this song, I think it's a really pretty song. I think it's really cool to hear Brian's voice when he was so young and doing all those crazy notes. I think Audrey sounds great on it. It is a bit of a cash in, obviously, because like you mentioned, the Barbie doll just been introduced, but I still think it's a really pretty song lyrically. Like, it doesn't have to just be like about like, a toy doll. It could just be about like your girlfriend. And I think it would have been kind of cool if they'd put this in the Barbie movie that just came out last year. I know it's a really, really obscure song, but that still would have been really cool. But yeah, going back to Barbie, I really enjoy it for what it is. I think it's like a really cool document of like an early Brian Wilson vocal. I love hearing Audrey's voice, and I think it's just a really pretty song. So I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a really pretty song. It does have a similar chord progression to Surfer Girl. Like the first four chords in Surfer Girl are the same, or the ones used in Barbie. It's just what makes Surfer Girl a little bit special is Brian. When he goes back to resolve to the D instead of going to a D, he goes to a D7, and which music nerds will understand what I'm saying. But so it is a very similar chord progression. I really like the bridge on this one, and then how the bridge goes straight into a key change. I think that's really cool. And I know Brian didn't write that, but Brian's voice just like it's so smooth, and the key change is really hard to notice unless you really listen for it. So good songwriting. I don't think it's anything crazy special, but I mean it's awesome to hear Brian's voice and Audrey's voice in that same song, and it's very charming, even though it's nothing crazy special musically.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of those songs that came out on all those cheap, low budget albums. The big Beach Boys' biggest beach hits, I think, was the first one. Was a really cheesy cover of a drawing of a blonde with a surfboard, and all those record companies took advantage of all those Hype Morgan recordings that were licensed, usually by Joe Saraceno, who worked for Kendrick's Records. He's gone now, so I'm not talking out of turn here, kind of thing. But that's kind of what he did. He didn't really have the legal rights to these songs, but he would loan them out or lease them out for money to all these low budget record companies. And you never heard it in good quality because they were always, fifth, sixth generation or whatever. So, one of the nice things about the Steve Hoffman CD when that came out, and then, Omnivore, took it another level too with all the versions of Barbie. Hoffman pretty much was like the greatest hits of the Hype Morgan thing, like one or two copies of each kind of thing. It's a great CD. Uh, but the cleaned up versions, you could finally got to hear a nice, version of it from the original tapes. So that was kind of cool.
All right, so now moving on to the B side of Barbie. What is a young girl made of?
Hmm.
Um, so I think this is an okay song. I think it's kind of typical of a lot of music from that time. I don't think it really stands out as a like really strong song by any means, but I do think that Brian delivers a really good vocal on this. I think it's also I might be wrong in this, but I think it's like one of his first like falsettos as well. And you can tell it doesn't sound like his falsetto on other recordings. He was still working on it, but he does do a falsetto on this, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I think it's just an okay song. I think even Brian said in a I think like a radio interview from the 70s that like this kind of was just one of those songs of its time. It's a song that definitely comes from that era.
Hmm.
But I don't think it's bad by any means. But it's not one I really come back to too often, other than just to hear Brian's voice. So
Yeah, I pretty much echo what you said, Jake. I agree with that. It's a song of its times. It's not written by any of the Beach Boys. It was a B-side, first of all, so probably not as much thought giving into it. Um, and it's written by, a woman who is in her late 40s. So it's a sweet song, it's her sensibility of what the dating scene was like, probably when she was a young woman, growing up in the 20s and the 30s. And the boys are doing it, pretty much as a favor, so you can kind of see them like, I don't think Mike is not at the session. I don't think Dennis is at the session. I think there's some rumor or truth to the fact that Al might have been there, that
mm.
Al, Carl, and Audrey, might be contributing some of the vocals there. Um, I don't have the best ears, nothing wrong with my hearing, but I don't have the best ears for like, dissecting songs. Like some guys are really good at like listening to a song and say, oh, I can hear this guy here at this range and know exactly where they are on the stack. I never really had that gift. But not all the Beach Boys even show up, because it's like, I think Dennis and Mike were like, I got better things to do. So it's a little bit of Brian probably being leaned on by Murray and Audrey to, help out Hite and Dorinda, perhaps as a favorite, a payback favorite kind of thing. But it's a song very, of its time, of its time.
I'll be honest, I love this song. I love it. I really love that kind of teen pop vibe from any era. I'm a huge sucker for it, from anything from this to the 90s, whatever. It has that vibe. I love it. It has like the doo-woppy vibe. I love it. I love Brian's vocal. I love the lyrics. They're very sensible. They're very sweet. I don't think people think it's Audrey on there. I think it's just a generic, like nondescript backing vocalist is what it sounds like to me, just like some random session ladies that nobody knows who they are. But if you are listening to the version on the Hoffman CD, you can kind of hear, I think, Carl at the end where Brian's like, I kind of laughed. And he's like, you did laugh. Like, I think like as like the tape cuts. So I think Carl was there. But I honestly love this song. I actually prefer it to Barbie. I love it. I have listened to it on repeat sometimes for like half an hour. Love it.
Yeah, okay, cool.
It's your shortening bread.
Kind of, yeah. I love it.
It says "Be My Baby."
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not as hot, and it's not as good as Be My Baby, but I just really love it for what it is. I don't know why. It's just like I'm a sucker for like that kind of teen pop doo-wop thing. So like I just love it.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a cute song and very catchy and very, very hummable, very memorable, melody. So
yeah. And I even like the lyrics too. You're like, what is a young girl made of? Sugar, they say, and spice. I just love it. I just really do. It just puts a smile on my face even talking about it.
In that radio interview that Brian did in the 70s where he mentions this record, he was talking about how rare the Barbie and What Is a Young Girl Made Of record was. And he says how like he had a great affection and love for like those 50s teen pop records from that time. He was talking about like Dion and people like that. So yeah, I think that was kind of the sound they were going for with that. And I mean, if you judge it that way, as one of those records, it's definitely a solid track, So
yeah.
Riley?
I also really like this one. I don't think I listen to it for half an hour every day, but I mean I do like it. That's a different track. That's called I Get Around. But I am a fan of it. I think it's very cool that Brian's doing his best Dion impression. Jake, you took the words right out of my mouth right before I could say it.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. But
okay.
you can really tell that he's trying to do his best Dion impression because it's not your average Brian vocal. He's just like very smooth, very like teen poppy, as we've been saying, rather than his vocal that he'll do on other tracks. Kind of similar to Cuckoo Clock, I guess, in some spots in terms of the vocal delivery. But I really like his first falsetto at the end because it's very much not his best, but it's still very charming. And again, I think he's trying to do an impression of a teen pop like singer rather than himself, which is why the falsetto kind of comes off as a little like weird. But I still think it's very charming, very cool. And I do prefer it to Barbie too. I think I just like the fast pacedness to it. I kind of wish that he was able to do a song like this in one of the early albums instead of Chug-a-Lug. Then again, I do love Chug-a-Lug too, so it's okay.
And let me just say this. I didn't listen to it for half an hour every day. I listened to it half an hour once when I was at work, when I used to work at my old job. So I put my music on, I would be at the machine scanning checks, and I was like, what is a young girl made of? Da, 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 da. Actually, around the same time I was reading your book, Jim. That's when I got that CD.
Okay.
I really like I do like the "That's what you are." That part's really
Yes.
cool. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to move on to some Brian and Gary Usher collaborations, or some early Brian and Gary Usher collaborations. So this first one, there's not a lot known about this one, but I feel like maybe Jim can tell us a little bit more about it. It's the song Malibu Sunset. So this song is said to be a Brian Wilson, Gary Usher collaboration, although I've also heard some people suggest that it's mostly an Usher song. I really love this song a lot. I think the melody is beautiful. I really like the arrangement as well, with the piano in the background, the soft piano and the guitar. I'm not sure who's singing, if it's Gary Usher or not, but I do like the vocal on it. And I think that kind of the low quality, like kind of that lo-fi sound of the recording, it kind of gives it a haunting vibe as well, which I like. That said, though, I do wish this got an official release, like a cleaned up sounding release, because I would really like to hear this song in better quality. But I just think it's a really pretty track, and I'd love to know more about it, Jim, if you know any more about it.
Yeah, I don't know too much about it. The songwriting credits on BMI, the music publishing site, there was ASCAP and BMI, credits it to Gary Usher and Roger Christian.
Oh,
I Yeah, and then there was some talk there, was it for Glenn Campbell? But it's certainly not Glenn Campbell. It's not his.
I heard that too, the Glenn Campbell thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and Campbell comes much later in the Beach Boys sphere, their circle. So I kind of agree with Riley. I think it's Gary Usher. Again, I'm not a real expert on Gary Usher's voice, but since he wrote it with Roger Christian, it stands to reason that it's his voice on the demo. I agree with you, Jake, that I wish they had, fleshed it out a little bit and had given it more takes and, more arrangements and layered on more instruments, perhaps. Because it is a pretty song. It's a pretty melody. It would have fit nice on the Surfer Girl album. So it could have had a career, so to speak, or place in pop history. But it's one of those things where these guys were writing. Gary was writing with Brian. He was writing by himself. He wrote a lot with Roger Christian. Brian was writing with Roger Christian. There was so much cross-pollination. And like you guys alluded to earlier on, Brian was just exploding with music in '63. All the stuff he does with the Beach Boys, all the stuff he does with the Honeys, all the other groups that he's producing outside the band. One theory is had he kept all that music for the Beach Boys, they would have had like 10 albums in 1963. So there's just music was just pouring out of him. And he didn't really care about money or number ones or gold records. He just did it for the purity and the love of music. And I think it was fun and exciting for him to work with other people, other lyricists, other musicians, certainly female vocalists. He always loved female vocalists. So apart from that, I don't know really much about the record, but if I was in Vegas and I was a betting man, I would go with that's a Gary Usher vocal.
Yeah, I listened to it earlier today. I thought it was a very evocative song. It was a very pretty song. It was very melancholic. The vocal was great, whoever's singing it. Why this sat in the can, I really don't know. I think this could have easily slipped on a number of albums and replaced some of the lesser stuff. But hey, that's kind of what we're used to with this band. You look at what was thrown in the vault and you're like, what the hell were they thinking? But anyway, I think it's a really pretty song, and I really enjoyed listening to it. And I'm glad you highlighted it, Riley, because I never would have seeked it out myself. Really, really enjoyable song.
Yeah, you know how I am. I dig in deep with some of that weird shit. There's some stuff I wanted to put on this list, but I was like, I think only I am the only other person to ever find this song ever. That being said, I think Malibu Sunset is just like an absolute gorgeous song. For a while, I thought it was a Brian Wright, and then I started reading your book, Jim, and I read for the first time that Lonely Sea was actually written by that book, actually. To be exact.
Yeah.
This book. I read in your book that Lonely Sea was the melody was written by Gary Usher, and then I kind of since I was like in the 1962 era of the book, I was like, oh, let me listen to some of the 62 stuff that they wrote. And then I refound Malibu Sunset and I listened to it. I'm like, if Gary Usher can write the melody to Lonely Sea, then there's not really much info about Brian in this. Maybe Gary Usher just wrote this himself. At the very least, the melody is very reminiscent of something that he would do.
Mhm.
Because Gary Usher, I mean, he kind of gets a little dogged out on the Beach Boys canon. He has some great songwriting chops, and he has some good melodic chops to himself.
Yeah.
And I kind of wondered, the voice sounds like him. Brian's not really anywhere to be found on this. Is it just purely a Gary Usher song?
Mhm.
So that's kind of my thoughts with it. But I think the melody is beautiful, very haunting. It reminds me a lot of Your Summer Dream, um, just from the general chords being used. And kind of the reason I put it with this is because I think Gary Usher had a massive influence on Brian's songwriting, at least in terms of melodies. And I feel like if anything, this kind of just shows that Brian took a lot of influence from him. And some of the best stuff is down the road. Probably wouldn't be what it was without Gary Usher's initial influence on Brian's songwriting. So, and this song's also just really damn good. And if Brian did have some influence on it, I don't know why the hell he didn't release it somewhere. I mean, he probably could have given it to, if it's not the Beach Boys, maybe the Honeys, maybe the Survivors, his little in-studio group, somebody. But
Yeah.
and Gary Usher, like, dude, why didn't you release this shit? Like, if Surfer Girl's a hit on the radio, why aren't you releasing this? Gary Usher had a lot of it in-studio groups that he did in the 64, 65. Like,
Mhm.
dude, fucking release this song. It's good.
Yeah.
All right, so the next song, The Revolution, which is listed as under Rachel and the Revolvers for the artist on this one. So I know this is another Wilson and Gary Usher collaboration.
Mhm.
My opinion on this one, I can kind of see what they were going for here. It kind of has like that early like twist record sound. I also read that it was inspired a bit by the Locomotion, which was a big hit around that time as well. Honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of this one though. I think that the Revolution chorus kind of gets old after a little bit. I do like the rotate part though. I think that's kind of nice. I also know that there's some speculation on who the actual singer is on this, the female vocalist on this, but maybe Jim, you can get more into that. I'm sure you might have some knowledge on that, but I think it's not a bad song, but it does get on my nerves pretty quick, so I don't listen to it very often.
Yeah, you pretty much take the words right out of my mouth there. Like, I pretty much agree with you, everything you said. I find it strident. I find it harsh on the ears. The revolution is just harsh to listen to. I don't know if it's the production, the vocalists. Brian and Gary loved The Locomotion, huge hit written by Carole King for her housekeeper or babysitter, Little Eva. Huge hit, monster hit in the summer of 62, August of 62. They're listening to it. They're like, okay, it's a huge dance record, right? The Locomotion. Let's us come up with a dance record. We'll call it The Revolution. And they go into the black neighborhood of Los Angeles and they look for a female R&B singer. It's a comical story. You can read it. Steve McParlin, documented it first with his interviews with Gary Usher and his work on Gary Usher's landmark work with Gary Usher, 5-volume set. I heavily footnoted everything that I used from Stephen's work. He was the original source. Gary Usher was gone by the time I wrote the book, so I relied on Stephen's work for that. But yeah, they go into black neighborhoods and R&B, and here's these two white waspy kids from the Southern California suburbs, and they're looking for a black female singer. So you can imagine how how many kind of crazy looks they must have gotten for that. Paid her a flat fee, and whether it's Betty Willis or Betty Everett or no one has ever come up with the actual name of who Rachel is. You know, the song, they take it to Russ Reagan, the record promoter who works for Buckeye Distributors, who promoted surfing and who is credited with naming the Beach Boys. So Russ Reagan goes on to have this monster career in the record industry with Elton John and Neil Diamond. But at the time, Russ Reagan financed the record. They were like, okay, we got this song. We're not recording it as the Beach Boys. We're not using it with Capitol. And they take it to Randy Woods, who owns Dot Records. Randy agrees to release it. Maybe thinking like, okay, I passed on Brian Wilson once. I'm not going to pass on him again. And Randy releases it. It gets some radio play and it charts a little bit locally, but doesn't do much. It kind of has a short ascent and then it drops. Um, but not a record that I enjoy listening to. I've got the promo copy. I've got a stock copy of it. It's reasonably collectible. Not horribly expensive. But just not a record that I like listening to. Yeah, I just think the vocals were, with a different vocalist, maybe it would be a more enjoyable record. I just find it harsh on the ears. It's just strident. That revolution just gets on my nerves. It's like chalk on a blackboard almost.
I thought it was a fun song. I probably wouldn't like choose to put on, but I thought it was an enjoyable listen when I was listening to it. I kind of I kind of gives me like that early girl group vibe of like the Shirelles or something like that. What sounds like they're going for there. I quite like the horns on it. The horn sound was pretty good. I think it's fun for what it is, but yeah, I probably wouldn't like choose to put on in my rotation. I kind of can see why it wasn't a huge hit. But it's nice. It's nice to hear an early Brian Wilson production and him and Gary Usher. Again, another songwriting exercise. And who knows who sang it? But I will say I did look up the story of Betty Willis, and that was very sad. That's all I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say about it because it's very sad. And I just warning for our listeners: if you go look it up, it's a very very sad story.
Yeah. So many of the people back then, had sad lives or were taken advantage of by the record industry. It was, it still is, buyer beware or be careful what you sign and things like that. People who gave away their rights to their song rights and song credits and publishing and things like that. It was a tough industry back then.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got a little annoyed by it, but I do really like the verses. Go around and around. I thought that was pretty cool, but the chorus, nothing crazy there. It is on my Beach Boys playlist, but I could probably see myself taking it off a Beach Boys playlist if I listen to it a couple more times and don't really like it. But that being said, I think it's actually an important stepping stone in Brian's career. This was Brian's first production that was released.
Mm-hmm.
This is before Surf and Safari. This is before Surfer Girl. Even when Brian wasn't really getting too much credit as a producer, but like this is his first solo production that is outside the band or even with the band. And you already hear horns. I think it's just nuts that Brian is already experimenting with adding this stuff into his productions. I think it's an important stepping stone, even if it is a little bit annoying in some parts. But you can kind of see what's coming later. I mean, I'll say this a couple episodes down the line when we get to Little Do Scoop. I mean, I feel like if Beach Boys today is the stepping stone into Pet Sounds, then like what's the stepping stone into Beach Boys today? And I feel like this is one of those earliest spots where you can see him getting pretty complex with his productions and his arrangements. So I think it's really cool.
Yeah, you raise a good point, Riley. It's his first, record production outside the Beach Boys, and sadly, though, on the record label, he's not credited. So a lot of times on record labels, you'll see, produced by, the person who produced the record. So he produced it, but the record label, the copy that was sent to Dot Records, I guess, to print the record labels, did not have a production credit. So, it's an uncredited production, but it is his first production outside of the Beach Boys. Yeah. The Surfer Moon will become his first credited production outside the Beach Boys, which will come shortly after, Rachel and the Revolvers.
All right, so now we'll move on to the B side of The Revolution, which is number one. Another, I believe, Wilson and Gary Usher song, but I actually strongly prefer it to The Revolution. I think the melody on this is really, really pretty. I love the piano playing in the background, and the vocal on this is really good as well. I think she sings it really well. I also like Brian's own recording of this, which I believe is listed as Visions on like some bootleg recordings. I really like that one as well. I think Brian sings it really well. I'm not sure if anyone else is on there. I think some people say maybe Audrey's on there somewhere, but I'm not 100% on that. But I pretty much like all versions of this song. I think it's a pretty melody, and I think it's just a really beautiful song. So that's my thoughts on number one. And it is one of the earlier songs I do actually come back to quite a bit. So.
Yeah, I like number one more than Rachel, more than The Revolution, actually, for all the reasons I said before. And you pointed out it was called Visions at one point, which is one of the songs that they recorded back in April of '62 at Western, when Gary Usher, very key moment in Brian's career, says, hey, they're not going to come knocking on your door. You got to get motivated. You got to get off the couch. You got to go, you got to go get this. You got to finish songs and you got to record them if you want a career in music. pivotal moment in Brian Wilson's career. And it's one of the songs that they recorded at Western in April of '62 as Visions. So yeah, very pretty song. I'm not sure if Audrey's on it or not. It's in some of those sessions in April of '62, and there were at least two sessions, I think, around the 14th and the 15th or 16th of April. Murray and Audrey might have been there. They might have gone down with them. The band and the boys were so new at this. And Murray, of course, a little blustery kind of thing, wanted to show his dominance or show his expertise in the studio and the recording industry. And he was enjoying the ride as much as anybody, of course, vicariously through his sons. So they might be there, and certainly Murray did not have a good singing voice, but so maybe Audrey's there. I'm not sure. That would be a good question for an audiologist. But yeah, nice song, nice, very mellow, evocative, kind of lulls you into a, kind of a nice mood kind of song. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that it was a very pretty song, very evocative. I love the lead vocal. I thought it was beautifully sung, much better than the A side, and almost, I don't know if this is gonna sound a little crazy, but almost sounded a little Bacharach-y to me, kind of, a little bit.
Yeah.
Like just kind of like I could hear some of that in there. Like I could hear this being a song that like Bacharach would have given to Dionne Warwick or something. I think it's a really, really beautiful song. And this is another one too that I think is unfortunate that it kind of went nowhere because it's really pretty. I just think that it's kind of sad that like, more of these songs that Brian wrote didn't really go anywhere because they're really, really pretty. Very evocative track, very, very beautiful song.
I don't know if I enjoyed it as much as you guys. I do enjoy it, but I don't think it's anything crazy. That being said, I think I do like some of the chord changes in there. I think it's pretty cool. Shows Brian very much evolving as a songwriter past the initial Surfin', which is just three chords and three verses, which is going from here to Visions. You can already or number one, you can already see humongous growth as a songwriter and how the best is yet to come. But that being said, I'm not a huge fan of it. It's not on my Beach Boys playlist. I actually prefer the Revolution a little bit. But I do think, I guess there is more potential in this one than there was in Revolution. That makes any sense. Not much else to say that hasn't been said, but I do really appreciate the song as it is just Brian growing as a songwriter.
So next we'll move on to One Way Road to Love, which is listed, I believe, as a Brian Wilson Gary Usher collaboration. I wasn't really familiar with this one before preparing for this episode, but I do think it's a pretty solid song, actually. I really like the falsetto backing vocals during the chorus or that bridge section. I believe that's Brian. I'm not 100%, but it does sound kind of like his falsetto. This is another one where the quality of the recording isn't that great, but I do still think it's a solid track, and I like that little piano part towards the end of the song as well. So solid track, not one I would like regularly come back to, but I do think it's a decent song, and I'm glad that there's at least some recording of it out there. So
yeah, not one of my favorite songs either. But again, this was a Gary Usher demo. I think when Gary, says, "Hey, listen, let's go into Western. You meet Chuck Britz. We'll get some demos ready for the Beach Boys that you can shop around and try to get a record deal. And I'm going to try to further my own career too, and I'm going to make some demos." And again, there's this cross-pollination, but I'm never really a big fan of Gary Usher's vocals. Usher goes on to have this huge career in the record industry and dies way too young, of cancer, and kind of a sad end there for him. But as a big influence, works with a lot of different people, a lot of great producers, the Union Gap, and he wrote "Don't Give In to Him" for the Union Gap, if you remember that song. Anyway, it's a really good career. But I'm just not a fan of some of those early records that he produced or certainly sang on. So I have a hard time, I guess being objective kind of thing, and this is music where, it either moves you or it doesn't move you, and you try to quantify it in a way, but it's an emotional response, of what you're listening to. So not a fan of One Way Road to Love. It's nice. It's just not something I would listen to more than once,
Yeah. Do you know if that's Brian's falsetto during that bridge section or the chorus? It does sound like him to me, but
I think I agree with you. It sounds like him. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, gotcha. Matt?
I enjoyed the guitar on this song. That was the first thing I took away from this. The song in general to me kind of had like a very like almost inspired by like the earliest music of rock and roll, like the really early stuff.
Mm.
I like the harmonies on it. I thought it was a solid song. This was the first time I'd ever listened to it in preparation for this. I don't know if I would go back to it often, but I enjoyed it for what it was, and I think it's a pretty good early song from that partnership. And I think it's also better than some of the stuff that did end up on some of these early albums, but I think that doesn't need to be repeated because it kind of has been implied already a bunch of times. Riley.
You see, I agree with you there, Matt. I mean, I do like this song. I think it's I like the harmonies on it. I like the falsetto, and I maybe it's just me, but I actually think some of the graininess kind of adds to the quality of the song.
I
Um,
agree.
that being said, it is still it is better than a lot of what came on Surf and Safari, but I guess this is where I kind of agree with Capitol and their approach to the bit, especially the earliest period with the band is would it really fit thematically on that album?
Mm.
Is same with a lot of these songs like Visions, maybe not Revolution, but um honestly any of the stuff they did like Surf and Safari is a great time capsule into 1962 America with root beer and like
Had
I
you
mean, the
win?
shift, like the dresses and the shift, and Heads I Win Tells You Lose. All that novelty stuff is a great like time capsule. And then hear a song like One Way Road to Love or Visions. Like, does that fit thematically on Surf and Safari? Is that where you're gonna market to your new California band?
Mhm.
Not really. Um, and it makes sense because when they did stylistically shift away from that stuff, today it didn't really sell as well as the other shit. So
Yeah.
Hmm.
makes
That-
sense.
That's a really good point, I think, Riley, because when you think about it, when they go into the tower to record the Surf and Safari album, and they're not real deep with material, they could have gone back to April and said, well, we've got these other songs that we demoed at Western, not just Judy and Stomp that we talked about already, but these Gary Usher recordings. And obviously decided not to resurrect them and rework them and flesh them out a little bit more. Probably because of that, thematically, they really wouldn't fit. It was a summer album of even the photos of the band on the back of the Surf and Safari album, t-shirts, chinos and barefoot or flip-flops, they were like the image of they just came off the beach literally from surfing and they're going to just, lay down some songs here and record and it was a fun album. It was an album that was clearly marketed to, teenage America. And, would that song thematically fit in? So I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, you can't go from Chug-a-Lug to One Way Road to Love.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
would be pretty funny.
I do want to shout this out because when I was reading your book, I found out that Nick Venet had a little bit of a solo career before the Beach Boys.
Yeah, big,
Call me
big.
crazy, but Gary Usher and Nick Venet's voices are so damn similar.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. He grew up in Baltimore, not far from where I live, and he was Greek American, and his family had a diner. Bit of a stereotype, but he had a diner, and he worked his way to California, and he was on RCA. He was on RCA Victor. There's a EP that he put out, and it was like flipping with Nick Venet. And he had the perfect hair and gloss back, and he was being groomed as a teen idol.
Jesse Kostopoulos from Full House.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And in fact, all those guys, Saraceno had a record career, Nick Venet had a record career, Russ Reagan had a record career. So all those guys that were in their 30s or late 20s, that were instrumental in forming the Beach Boys and helping them, forge their career, all had record careers that basically stalled at some point. Vinay had probably the most success because he was on RCA Victor and they had an EP out, and there's a fair amount of ink and press, when you search newspapers digitally across the country back then. But then, RCA didn't renew his contract, and that was it. And then he lands at Capitol, and then winds up with the Beach Boys. But
All right, and then I think we got one more, right, Jake?
Hmm.
Yeah, so one more we're going to talk about, and it's another Brian Wilson Gary Usher collaboration, The Beginning of the End.
mhm.
So this is another one that I wasn't really that familiar with before we did this episode, but I'm glad that I gave it a listen because I actually really like this one quite a bit. I think it has a good melody, and I really like Brian's vocal on it, especially on that bridge section. I think that he sings that really well. And I think it's an early example of how emotive and moving Brian's voice could be. I think it's a great showcase of Brian's vocal talent. I also like the organ and the guitar solo on this as well. I think the guitar solo adds a bit to the track. And it's another song where I think the poor quality of the recording gives it kind of a haunting vibe, which is something I've said with some of these other tracks as well. But I like the song quite a bit, and it was definitely kind of the surprise for me of all these tracks that we listened to, because a lot of these that like Barbie, I had heard Barbie before and I liked it, but this one I really wasn't that familiar with, and listening to it, I enjoyed it quite a bit. So, any thoughts on this one, Jim?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. With what you said there too. It's a pretty song. It's nice. It could have probably been handled better if they gave it a second shot at the Capitol
Yeah.
Tower. Um, Not to steal what Riley might say, but probably thematically would not have fit with the Surf and Safari album. Um, and I guess even Gary had given up on it because I think Visions was recorded by someone else now. I'd have to research this, but I'm pretty sure Visions was actually wound up on a 45 by another artist. So Gary did go back and kind of rework Visions. But the One Way Road to Love and the beginning of the end, I think they were never revisited. He never tried to resurrect them and breathe new life into them. So, but yeah, a pretty recording, again, historical document, that a time capsule from April of '62 at when the Beach Boys are at a crossroad, when they are without a record label, they want to get away from Hite and Dorinda Morgan. They don't trust Kendrick's records. They are labelless and they're floundering. And Gary comes in and shows them the path on how to proceed. You got to do it yourself. You got to take it to them. You got to record your demos and you got to pound the pavement and get a record label. So it's part of that whole mystique. Those April recordings are so fascinating because everything on that demo tape that Murray uses to get them signed to Capitol, and then these other demos that Gary's recording, trying to further his own career. They just become this great historical document because of what these guys go on to become.
Yep, I thought it was listened to it earlier. I thought it was a really nice song. I really liked the guitar work on it. I loved Brian's vocal on it. I did a great job with that. I quite liked the solo that was in the bridge, and I enjoyed the lyrics too. But I think that this would definitely be one that would have been cool if they had fleshed it out a little bit more, gave another shot at like the Capitol Tower or something, and really maybe it could have ended up on an album. Who knows? But as it stands, I think it's a really enjoyable recording and a very nice song.
I do find this to be like Brian's first true dip into like an emotional song, but I also find it funny that it's also like mid-tempo rocker at the same time. But like this is the kind of song that I mean, if you reproduce it, like literally like redo the production on it, maybe touch up the lyrics a little bit, and you put it on Beach Boys Today, side one, I probably would see it fit there. I don't know if it's any like as quality as like some of those like Good to My Baby or like Dance Dance Dance, but still I think it's like it thematically could have fit on that album. I do think it's a very emotional song, but also like I said, mid-tempo rocker. I really like it. It was also one that took me by surprise. But at the same time, playing devil's advocate, I'm curious like how many of these recordings that they did in like April '62 were really just songwriting exercises for Brian and Gary. Because like you said, they only did like two takes of them. And like you said, Gary just wanted Brian to get off his ass. And it's like, are these just their first songs and they were like meant to be songwriting exercises? Um, but also countering that, maybe it was songwriting exercises, and these were the first steps that Brian and Gary took to write songs like In My Room or We'll Run Away, which showed up later on in their songwriting partnership. So
Good point. You got to remember, this is the first time well, actually, there's some talk that Brian may have been in Western before that, or another studio, but this is the first time he meets Chuck Britt, so it might be the first time he's in Western. So you got to imagine that, what did Brian know and when did he know it kind of thing. It's like, okay, they begin recording in say, October, November of '61. They have a session February 8th of '62. They do the Barbie, What Is a Young Girl Made of session at Stereo Masters on behalf of the Morgans. And now April of '62, they're meeting Chuck Britz at Western in a very professional studio, the studio where Pet Sounds will be recorded down the road. So, Brian is, he's like a kid in a candy store and he's learning all these new toys and these new techniques that not only Usher is familiar with, from his, early recording career, but things that Chuck Britz can teach him. And Britz
Mhm.
becomes invaluable ally as far as his ears and sound and mixing and things like that. So, Brian is still kind of on the cusp of his talent, I think, just fully exploding at that point.
A couple of other things I wanted to quickly mention that are kind of like history related things that we didn't talk about earlier. I read that Brian took a musical appreciation course in college, but he dropped out of it because they were against pop music, which Brian was obviously a big fan of. They would only care about music if it was like classical pieces, which I thought was kind of sad, honestly. But I can understand that at that time a lot of people did frown down upon pop music and didn't take it seriously. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then the other thing I wrote down, a funny quote from Brian that I read from the recent Beach Boys book that came out, I believe, earlier this year. Brian said, I believe this was either referring to, I think this was referring to the Surfin' recording sessions. He said the first time we went into a studio, we were like five green idiots. All I know is that we had a song and we rehearsed it, or what? It wasn't like we knew what we were doing. Which I thought was kind of a funny quote coming from a guy that would go on to produce some of the most amazing music of the '60s and of our of the generation. So yeah, that's all I had to say there.
I had one more thing, and I'm kind of surprised I didn't mention it, but I also think it's pretty cool that we saved it for last. Is when it came time to sign their contracts with Capitol, Al Jardine quit, and because he didn't really agree with the musical direction that they were going. He kind of really relied on that folk side of things, and I think he kind of saw some of that with surfing because I mean surfing's like could be labeled as like proto punk, but at the same time there is a little bit of like a folk feel to it with like the acoustic guitars and stuff.
Mhm.
But he saw the direction they were going in, and I'm sure he saw what Brian was doing with like Surfing Safari and everything kind of going in more rock and roll direction. And Al Jardine backed out and he went back to college. Um,
He actually quit even earlier, Riley. If you look at the AFM recording contract for dated February 8th, 1962, and again, that's where they record Surfing Safari, Surfer Girl Judy, and Beach Boys Stomp. And then they tag on Surfing and Luau to make them legal with the union, the musicians union. Um, Jardine's name, he's on the recording contract as being one of the musicians. His social security number is there, and he would have been paid, probably, $30 or, not a lot of money or whatever. But then sometime after February 8th, the date of the session, and before February 11th, he quits. And his name is literally crossed off on the AFM contract. Someone scribbles it off. You can still see his name there. And one book actually mistakenly printed all their social security numbers, which was a huge mistake on the printer. All their social security numbers are out there, which is unfortunate. Subsequent editions of that book blocked them out as they should have been blacked out. But anyway, somebody crossed it off. I don't know who it was, somebody with the union or whatever. And I don't think Jardine ever got paid for that February 8th session at World Pacific Studios. But somewhere between the 8th and the 11th, he quits because on February 11th, there's a document from a Harry Klusmeyer who had like a promotional company. He would promote bands. And he writes to Murray Wilson and he says, okay, by going down from 5 guys to 4, what is your instrumentation needs? Are your instrumentation needs going to change? So when I book you, what do you need to be booked for? Are you losing a guitar? What are you doing instrumentally kind of thing? So Jardine is gone by February 11th. And you're right. He didn't really, rock and roll was not his thing. He wanted more of a folk group. He would have had a more of a folk sensibility. And that's not where they were going. Carl and David were sort of a guitar, they both had Fender Stratocasters. They were the guitar gods. They loved Chuck Berry and Eddie Cochran and all the guitar guys, Dwayne Eddy. And Jardine was disgruntled, I guess is one word for it. And also he didn't see a living in it. And he also tells the story of they play these concerts and some of the girls would be screaming and yelling either for Dennis or for Mike. And they'd come off the stage and the boyfriends would be jealous and the boyfriends would try to rough them up or say rude things to them or whatever. And Al didn't like that. And he probably didn't see a future there. And his parents actually had a strong influence on him. His parents wanted him to have a college education, very common in that generation. The parents had gone to college. They were both college graduates, which was unusual at that time. And they wanted Al and his brother Neil to be college graduates as well. Al's a young guy, he's 19, 20, and he goes back to school. He goes back to school.
What was it? I know there's the whole thing with Al, like he wanted to become a dentist, like he was going to dentist.
Wait. You know, you ever watch Rudolph? You know the elf that says he wants to be a dentist? That reminds me of Al so much.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like Al, honestly.
Yeah, one of the things I get mad at when I see, you know, a lot of Beach Boy websites and forums and, you know, social media and stuff like that is, you know, that he went back to dental school.
Yeah.
And that's not true. Al had, you know, at that point in February of 62, he had 3 semesters of college. He had his first year at Ferris Institute, now Ferris University. He had 1 semester the fall of 61, the fall of 61 at El Camino Community College. And he was taking classes in the spring semester in February of 62. So he was nowhere near dental school. You can't apply to dental school until probably senior year as an undergraduate. You had to take the dental school admissions test. You know, you had to have all your prerequisite courses together. So he really wasn't anywhere near. I think that was just something he threw out in an interview, got promulgated and cemented into Beach Boy lore, and you know, and you can't extract it. Once it got in, it was like a headless nail. You couldn't extract it. And you know, it's just something he threw out there, like, well, maybe I would have been a dentist. But he has also said that, you know, organic chemistry, which is a tough course if you're a science major, you know, that I think that put an end to his dental career. And he's also cited botany, you know, and botany can be a tough course too, with all the scientific names.
See him working with plants.
Yeah, but the real thing is, in mid-February of 62, when he quits, jump forward to hearing Surf and Safari and 409 on the radio. And then in March of 63, you know, I know we're a little bit ahead of ourselves, but he starts hearing Surfing USA and Shutdown. And he's like, what did I do? What did I do? Why did I quit? I'm studying organic chemistry. I'm breaking my ass studying this, you know. And then Brian, he, you know, that's why I called the chapter "The Greatest Second Chance in Rock and Roll." The great, you know, Brian Wilson calls him and says, "Hey, listen, I'm writing, I'm producing, I'm arranging, I'm working with the musicians. You know, I've got so much on my plate. I really don't want to go out and sing songs. That's not my thing. I'm not comfortable on stage. You know, can you come back and fill in for me?" And again, we're you know, we'll save this for the next episode, but you know, that was Jardine's salvation. It was like, perfect. You know, I can play bass, I can play guitar, I can kind of fill in for you vocally, and it's genius. I'll stay home and write the songs, and you guys go out on the road and bring our new music to our fans, our, you know, growing numbers of fans. And I was like, I'll sign. Where do I sign up? You know, he's at the airport waiting with his luggage. You know, it's like, yeah, I'm on board. You know,
when he initially quits, who do they bring in? David fucking Marks. That's what they brought in.
They go next door. It's a Sunday afternoon. I think you know, Bonanza is on, the old TV show Bonanza. And you know, Marks is let's see, he was born in 48, August of 48.
13 years old.
61. He's a kid. Yeah, he's a kid. He's in his pajamas watching TV with his parents. He's the only child, you know, but he's Carl's friend. You know, Carl and him have been playing guitar for about 3 years. I guess he's fairly proficient rhythm guitar player at that time, you know, the chunky sound, you know, bar chords and things like that, and, you know, double tracking and things like that. And they get him. But I talked to people from my book that said, you know, surf guitarists and guys that were in the Bel Airs actually had written Mr. Moto. And a lot of the surf guitarists at that time who were pretty good in surf bands were surprised that the Beach Boys picked David Marks. That there were a number of guitarists and musicians in general who they could have picked who might have been better choices. And of course, David's biggest shortcoming, which leads, I think, to his leaving the group eventually, is and not really being encouraged to stay and come back. You know, when he threatens to quit, Murray says, "Oh yeah, I'll hold you to it." And you know, whether the Wilsons and Mike then thought he was just kidding or whatever, but there's not a big effort to bring him back in the fold, because vocally he didn't really fit into the stack. You know, he didn't have as good singing voice.
Yeah,
because he was also young enough where his voice might even have changed. You know, because he was still young, his voice might have changed as teenagers do. So, you know, when he his biggest mistake was to threaten to quit the Beach Boys. You know, on August 31st,
do it.
1963, when they're traveling from Chicago to New York to play a Murray the K show, and they're all in the car, and he's getting on Murray's nerves, and he supposedly sits up in the car and he farts in Murray's face, and Murray's up with him. Yeah, Murray's like this, and he's a pain in the ass. He's a kid. He's a young kid. He's 15
I
years
know
old.
it.
He's a kid.
I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because I
Yeah.
feel the little Deuce Coupe episode is going to be so much fun. But like,
Yeah.
I remember reading the
We
book.
can repeat all that for the
Yeah, I remember he's like a little like a douche
Little
like
douche kid.
something.
Little
He
douche
used to
kid.
sing that on the stage. Yeah, little
He's like, she's real fun, my 69. Like
Yeah.
he's so funny.
Also,
But
people forget a little tidbit. In 1981, he gave an interview for a magazine, and I have it somewhere. It was a little fanzine that came out, but it was sold on newsstands and stuff like that. And he does nothing but trash the Beach Boys.
Yeah, I've read that interview. Is that the one where he said like
I'm,
Carl has
I'm
never?
reading the John Stebbins book right now.
Oh, you
Uh-huh.
found that book?
Uh,
The Lost Beach Boy?
yeah, the Lost Beach Boy. Our friend Dave from was it Dave who's letting me borrow it? One of the people we've had on the show.
Yeah, David from Apples and Oranges.
David from Apples and Oranges is letting me read his copy. I feel bad because
Hmm.
I was supposed to read that this summer, but then I started working at the summer camp, and I ended up not finishing your book, and it was just like, all right. But I'm on it now, and it's an entertaining read. It's kind of filling in some of the spots that you weren't able to pick up with yours, because yours was like on the full group. This is like strictly on David. But
Yeah. And
he's a
also,
funny
John
little
Stebbins,
kid.
yeah, he had Elmer Marks, David's parents, Joanne and Elma, but were there. They toured with him a lot. Elmer was sort of like the road manager for a while. He would go out with them, and he kept a diary, and he
Hmm.
kept a journal, and he would write down, how much they made, the receipts, the date, where the venue, the couple of mistakes in there, a couple of things missing, but for the most part, it was a gold mine. It was like, oh, every writer's dream, a journal, a diary, taken at the time. So, yeah, and John was able to, forge a nice friendship with David and tell his story for the first time, so.
I don't know. But when they signed him, like I could just picture the little shit. Like he's like a 13-year-old like middle schooler in his pajamas, like, and I'm sure when they asked him, he had that fucking grin on his face, like.
Here's the thing to really think about with David Marks is when they signed May 24th, 1962, he's too young to sign for himself, so his parents have to sign for him. In fact, that was true of everybody except Mike Love. Only Mike Love was 21 at the time. So everybody else had to have their parents co-sign for them because they were so young. David owns 20% of the Beach Boys on May 24th. 20% of the Beach Boys moving forward for that capital contract. He has an attorney when they sign the contract, but in October of 63, when he leaves the Beach Boys, when he threatens to quit on August 31st or August 30th, and Murray holds him to it, for some reason, his parents and him do not get an attorney. So he's leaving the Beach Boys. He's leaving 20% of a big act at that time in October of 63. They had a lot of hits, a lot of hit albums, a lot of double-sided singles. Why they did not get legal advice and hire an attorney at that point is just beyond me. It's staggering. So he leaves, he gives up 20% of the Beach Boys, and no compensation, no nothing. I mean, big mistake. I mean, it hurt them financially in untold numbers. It was just crazy why they wouldn't get an attorney to give them some legal advice when they had one on the other end when they signed the contract.
Yeah, that's like with the Sea of Tunes thing too. It's like decisions you look back on, like well Murray sold the right. It's like, oh my gosh, like
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure they look back on that, but Joanne Marks, and this might be the only child syndrome. David, the sun rose and shine and set on David, and she reportedly, kind of filled his head with, David, you're just as good as they are. You can write songs, you can sing, you can play, you can front your own band, which he does. David and the Marksmen. You can go out on your own. You don't need them. Also, there was some talk about, Murray being a little, heavy-handed with Joanne. He was kind of taking, Joanne was very attractive, very attractive young wife and mother of David and Elmer. And, Murray, might have had a roving eye there. There's some talk of that. That's I believe in Stebbins' book as well. And then, whether or not Murray was being honest with them with the finances. Murray was very much, circle the wagons around my family. My three boys and my nephew. Al, David, you're outsiders. You're not in the family. You'll never be in the family. and David could not sing like Al could, and that was another strike against him. And then when he put on all those antics and wouldn't smile from the stage and change some of the lyrics to risque things,
Oh,
it
dude.
was too much for Bobby. And he's a kid. He made a kid's mistake. He made a kid's mistake. But why his parents weren't smarter, and I'm not saying that disparagingly, I'm saying it honestly. It's too bad on their behalf, because they should have said, well, wait a second, before you quit the Beach Boys, of which you own 20%, let's get an attorney. Let's hire an attorney and do this legally. So.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this 28th episode of Good Timin'. I hope you all enjoyed the show. I had a really great time discussing the Beach Boys early years with you guys. And I definitely feel like I learned a thing or two. Also, I just wanted to thank you again, Jim, for joining us today and sharing your wealth of knowledge on the band. And hopefully we can have you join us again for some episodes in the future. So as always, if you like this podcast and want to hear more, feel free to subscribe or follow wherever you're listening. We greatly appreciate the support, as it motivates us to make more episodes in the future. Also, as a reminder, the Good Timin' podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So there's plenty of different places to listen and keep up with the show. So thank you again, everybody, for listening, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.